Call to order this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District. It is Tuesday, October 1st, 2019, and the time is 5:09 p.m. I'll have a roll call starting from my far right.
Jan Michael Greenberg.
Sandy Kravitz, Barbara Perleberg,
Allison Beckham.
And Patty Beckman. All board members are present, and we do have a quorum. All rise. Vice President Beckham, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Sure.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, do any of our board members have any changes to the agenda? Board Member Beckham.
I would like to pull consent item D.
Consent agenda item, Board Member Beckham would like to pull 5D, approve the award of request for proposal number 20003, disposable food packaging. Thank you. All right. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Board Member Beckham moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, we move now to our information and discussion items. Dr. Freakard?
Thank you, President Beckman, members of the board. I'd like to introduce Mr. Gadd, our CFO, to introduce the first information item.
Thank you, Dr. Ricard. Madam President, members of the board, Mr. Dennis Osich is here in the audience and will present to you the audit report on procurement, the first of two that we're required to do with our settlement agreement with the Attorney General. We're very pleased with the outcome, and so, Mr. Osich, it's all yours.
Okay. Thank you, President. Thank you, the board, for having me here today. So as Jeff had mentioned, my name is Dennis Osich. I'm a principal with CLA, Clifton Larson Allen. And we were performing procedures directly related to the consent judgment related to procurement for the district. So I'm just going to briefly, you should have a copy of the report in front of you. I just want to briefly just run over really the main areas that we looked at, and the procedures that we performed were very specific in order to comply with that consent judgment. And it entailed looking at procurements of construction projects that were over $1 million. And then it also related to looking at all architect and engineer procured during 2018 to 2019. And then also sole source procurements during the year, emergency procurements, cooperative agreements, and then finally we looked at procurements that were over $100,000 during the year. And so you've got in the report that we provided, the exact procedures that we performed are listed in there, and those procedures were designed to comply with the consent judgment. The report was presented to the Attorney General's office, which they had accepted as well. And just to note, all of the procurements that we looked at were procurements that were issued during the fiscal year 2018-2019. So the sample size, it was, in these cases, it was 100% of the population. The population was much smaller because there were fewer procurements in the ranges that we were required to look at. So there were fewer procurements. But as a result of the procedures, we had no findings related to the procedures that were performed. So a positive result for the district, and at this point I'd be more than happy to answer any questions related to the procedures we performed or to the report itself.
Board Member Greenberg.
Thank you for your presentation. I have just a few questions. My first question is, just to clarify comment, this was something that was required by the Attorney General's office?
Yes.
Okay. Looking through this, could you just tell me a little bit about the internal auditing process? So you assessed, if I remember correctly from the presentation last year, you assessed what the statutes require. You assessed our internal policy for these specific procurements, and then you cited that everything was followed in accordance to that. Is that accurate, or?
Close. So what we did was the consent agreement basically detailed the main areas that I had just touched on. the specific procurements that they wanted to have examined or looked at. And so these procedures are very specific to what the consent judgment requested. And so the procedures that are listed in here then are basically requirements of statute. And so that's what the consent judgment was looking at, is to look at these procurements to determine that they were in accordance with statute. And so that's what each one of these procedures are. So it included statute and the USFR requirements. And USFR requirements are really designed by the Auditor General based on what statute says. And so what we looked at was we actually looked at the specific procurements. We didn't look at the design policies that were designed. What we did look at was we just looked at the specific procurements that were done during the year.
So when it says you, for example, 1B, cited written evidence in the procurement file that the district compiled and maintained a list of persons who requested to be added to the list, there is no test as to, not that I think it's inaccurate, just to be clear for the record, but there was no test to say that list is accurate or inaccurate. It's merely about what the statute requires, and do we have that documentation in place to show that, at a minimum, the paperwork and the procedures being done are in compliance with that statute.
That's correct.
In the meeting, when this was initiated, I believe there was a comment about maybe an informal write-up about, a supplemental write-up about, we think maybe these processes could be done better, or we think that they're doing great, or was that ever done, or was that outside the scope of?
It was not, and I'll explain the reason why. Is at the time when there was discussion about that, there was a law that was in place that precluded audit firms, and we were doing the audit of the trust at the time, which is considered a part of the district.
Right.
So because we were conducting an audit, we could not do consulting services. And so really, when you look at reviewing the policies and providing recommendations on how you could improve policies and procedures, that would be more of a consulting type of engagement. The agreed upon procedures isn't a test engagement, so that was allowable with the statute that was in place at the time. That statute has subsequently been removed, so it's not in place anymore. So firms that do audit services for school districts can now do consulting for them. So to answer your question, no, the consulting piece where we reviewed the policy and procedures was not part of this engagement.
Because of the statute?
Correct.
Okay. I have no further questions at this time. Thank you.
Any other questions from board members? No? Okay. Moving on to information and discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
First read of revisions to policy JFB, open enrollment. Dr. Freakard?
Thank you, President Beckman, members of the board. In our normal course of business, we bring policies to be reviewed. They're read at least 2 times, one time with review and then brought back a second time, either for action or further review. The policy on open enrollment has been reviewed and revised 14 times since 2004. It is always one of high interest, and it certainly is right now in this district as well. So with that, I would introduce Ms. Michelle Marshall, General Counsel, and Dr. Kim Guerin, Assistant Superintendent for Ed Services, who have been working on this revision and seeking input from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Creekard. Good afternoon, everybody. Kim and I, Dr. Guerin and I worked together on a short presentation which we'll go through, and then we'll pull up the actual policies and recommended revisions that you're used to seeing when we go through policies. So I'll just get started. We wanted to start with some of the statutory definitions. Arizona Revised Statute 15816 defines open enrollment. I won't read that to you, but it essentially talks about what open enrollment is. 816.01 simply says that districts shall have a policy without charging tuition, and we'll post that policy to the website. We did receive a lot of questions about recognizing discipline that happens in other districts when students come to open enroll. The state statutes are mostly silent about that issue, except for the issue of an actual expulsion by another district. We are explicitly permitted to recognize an expulsion that has happened in another district. If a student comes to open enroll, we can recognize that and decline to enroll the student. 15802B1 talks about what is required for proof of residency. We have to follow the guidelines that the ADE puts out, and they update it pretty regularly. I think the last one was April 2019, and they actually give a list of acceptable documents to show residency. Also, they note that proof of residency cannot be required for students who are homeless. Continuing about the proof of residency, I've listed some of the documents that are typically accepted and that are currently on the ADE's list of accepted documentation. They include a driver's license from Arizona, vehicle registration, the Address Confidentiality Program, which is a program that protects people who have been victims of domestic abuse. Rental agreements or leases are very typical things we see, utility bills, etc. If a family is in transition, homeless, having difficult circumstances, they do allow for the alternative that the family can present an affidavit of shared residency. That's a form that is available from us as a district and also available directly from ADE. That affidavit has to be accompanied by a notarized affidavit. Sorry, the form has to be accompanied by a notarized affidavit from the person whose residence that the family is residing in. Oops, I think I overshot that. Okay, beyond residency, we also have statutory guidance and policy regarding admitting students. One of the things that we have to do is determine with reliable documentation the student's age and identity. Typically, that's a birth certificate, but I've shared with you the statute, Arizona Revised Statute 15828, which says that within 30 days, a family has to provide either a birth certificate or other reliable proof of identity and age. So baptismal certificate, Social Security application, things like that. The last bullet point is for those students who are wards of the state. And I'll let Dr. Guerin take over here.
Okay. Good evening. I'd like to now share just some policy highlights, what's currently in our policy. Right now, we have policy that defines resident and non-resident students according to statute. So resident students are any students that reside in Scottsdale Unified School District. Non-resident students are any students that reside in the state of Arizona. There's also capacity language that drives our ability for each campus to accept open enrollment. And under the leadership of Dr. Sakos and Dr. Hagigat, we are going through that process right now. There's priority language based on subgroups. For example, we're able to give priority to siblings of students that are already enrolled in the school. There's admission standards related to students who have been expelled or long-term suspended. We have notification procedures in our current governing board policy. And there's also transportation procedures related to students with special education services. There we go. So just as an update, policy JFB has been updated annually, and in some cases more than annually. Frequent revisions have happened based on input and response to needs. So it's a very popular policy that we have revisited. So we have a few recommendations for you today that we'll get into detail about, but one is about revising capacity language. One is adding an open enrollment regulation to help make our current standard practice more transparent and clear for parents and families. And then we'd like to add an exhibit related to necessary steps required to revoke an open enrollment. So our first recommended policy change is related to capacity. So our current SUSD policy states, the superintendent shall by December of each year estimate how much excess capacity may exist to accept transfer students and shall submit to the board for approval. And again, we're currently going through this right now. Current Arizona School Board Association policy states the superintendent shall annually estimate excess capacity to accept transfer pupils. So the ASPA policy doesn't have the information going to the board. And we believe that that is quite beneficial to have that robust discussion based on each learning community. We think it's very valuable. But thought maybe landing in the middle of those two policies would be that the superintendent or superintendent's designee, which is our current practice right now, by December 1st shall annually estimate how much capacity may exist and shall report the estimate to the board. So the difference is the approval versus the reporting. That's the change we're recommending in that language. In regards to regulation, having a regulation that is aligned to our current open enrollment practice, this is something that we need to be very much transparent and clear with the community. So having a regulation posted with our other governing board policy, we think would be very helpful. It adopts our practice into formal regulation language, and it increases our communication and our transparency with our stakeholders. And it does continue our admission and revocation standards, and that language is in there, and Ms. Marshall will share it with you. In regards to an exhibit, adding this exhibit again brings it into light with our policy, and it outlines specific procedures to revoke the open enrollment status of a student. It requires specific steps, including a plan to improve attendance, graduation status, and our behavior that includes parent and guardian communication. So there needs to be a plan in place and steps taken to revoke an open enrollment. I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Marshall.
So as you know, we did meet with each of you to get your feedback on different drafts of this. And in addition to that, we had conference calls with all of the elementary and secondary principals who were available to attend those calls and give us their feedback. What we heard, and then we also checked in with our student information and records, SIMAR department, because they kind of have run this process for us over the years to see what is currently being done, how does that compare to the last version of the regulation and practice. So this just kind of summarizes some of the feedback that we got. One was consider adding more enrollment language into the regulation in terms of what is the process. Another was to consider adding language related to what are the items that are contained in that information packet that we're required to have available for families every year. Another was to consider adding the specific title of the position that's responsible for particular items. The example here is where we have superintendent's designee, say assistant superintendent for secondary and or elementary, for example. Adding language regarding the timestamp, and what that means is when people open enroll and submit documents online, their order of submission is marked on the bottom with date and time, and that's how we know, who came first. So the suggestion was to add language about that process. And then finally, updating the website to reflect the changes once the board decides on what changes we will do. I do want to note with respect to the website, even though we haven't had a posted regulation corresponding, if you go to the ASBA site and look for our policy, you'll see policy JFB open enrollment, but you won't see a regulation posted there. Even though that's been true for the last several years, 3 years, I think. We have had information on the website each year to try to tell our families what the process was. And when we went to look at it this year, the FAQs and that, it to me looked very user-friendly. and the best I've ever seen it. That doesn't mean it doesn't have room for improvement. We noticed a couple of things already that we would change, but just wanted to say that the website is pretty informative today. Okay, so that's the conclusion of the PowerPoint. I'll go ahead and pull up the actual policy and regulation, and if you have questions while I'm doing that, we can go ahead and get started. Let's see. Okay, I'll start with the policy. We haven't recommended any changes to the beginning of it, which is just that we have the program, no tuition charge pursuant to statute, defines, just like the statutes, what a resident student is, what a resident transfer and non-resident students are, that district students can enroll into other schools within the district. And here's where we start with the recommended changes. So we added or superintendent's designee where superintendent appeared in the policy. Oftentimes throughout the policy we'll say that because it's not actually the superintendent, but he or she is delegating to the appropriate person. So we still have the December 1 date in there. At one point we were talking about annually, but based on your feedback, we decided to put back in the December 1 date. Let's see. We still have the same enrollment priorities, but I will admit to a little bit of a failing with track changes and editing of my own. The original priorities for 2 and 3 here were reversed. So if I were any good at track changes, you would see the red line for that. But when we met with principals, it was requested that we switch these 2 categories. Siblings of district residents was 3rd, and district resident students currently enrolled was 2nd. We were asked to switch that, and all of the principals agreed with that change, so that's why we're recommending that switch. This language here, every attempt will be made not to split a family. We discovered when we went back through the numerous changes over the history to this policy that the board at the time did request that we add that language, but it didn't make it in. So we saw that and added it back in here. Under admission standards, that is in the policy, just referring to that statute I showed you earlier, saying that we can acknowledge an expulsion from another district. We also thought it would be good to add reference to the regulation and the exhibit that we're going to go through in a minute, so that if anybody's looking for, standards of admission or revocation, that reference is there. Under transportation, we also met with our director of transportation. Excuse me. And we added that if capacity exists to the beginning of that to make it clear that although we endeavor to transport open enrolled students whose parents can get them to an existing stop, it is possible that we might not have room to do that. And so we wanted to make that clear after consulting with our Director of Transportation. And then at the bottom there, we have had this language since 2011-12. It says the district will honor the grandfathered bus route for the students who attend schools from the previously unincorporated Rio Verde area. It is actually another school district, and so we, in talking through this, thought it should come out of the policy. We did get some feedback about, well, are you going to continue that route for those students? It's approximately 50 students today and 2 bus routes. And the thought in the discussion with Cabinet was absolutely we want to keep providing transportation to those students. And then one question we got in our meetings was, well, if we're taking it out of the policy, how are we guaranteeing that? And won't people think that we're not being transparent about that? Not sure what the answer to that is, but I do think if we do include some language about continuing that, we shouldn't refer to it like that. I don't think we should refer to it in the policy at all, given that it's another school district, but we can talk about solutions to that. So that is it for recommendations to changing the policy. Did you have
Feedback on that first.
Sure. Is there any comment, question on those proposed changes?
Board Member Greenberg.
What is the significance of the December 1st date?
Yeah, I asked that question too because not being the person who does that, I wondered if annually was more helpful to allow flexibility for those who have to figure these things out. I don't know if you have a better answer in terms of the timing of the December one, Dr. Guerin.
There is so much that goes into making these decisions. We need HR to get started on staffing. Principals need to plan programming. So even though we could change it to annually, we really need to do it by December. So I think, in getting feedback from all the stakeholder groups, and by the way, the principals were fantastic. They're the boots on the ground, really making this policy happen, and I felt like they were comfortable with that.
Great, thank you.
Board Member Perleberg.
Thank you, and thank you for talking to our principals about this policy. They are the ones that have to use it all throughout the school year, so appreciate that. Going back to the grandfathering language, the weirdness, and I know we discussed this a little bit in our one-on-one, others may have well, but in my definition of grandfathering in, it means kids who are, or students who are currently getting that service, they get it as long as they're in our school. But of course, if this has been in here since 2011, those kids have grown up and we
They're
have
driving
new
the
students
buses.
who are grandfathered in. So I guess that's just my question is, are we determining, are we just grandfathering that area in or the actual students who had currently have the service?
There are so much that goes on with transportation and programming and choice. I am starting a task force with transportation and mainly focused on special education, but we could put this under this umbrella to take a look at it. We certainly want to honor the families that are committed to us and continue it. And as Ms. Marshall said, the students might be driving the bus by now, but we can look at it through that task force.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
But
Thank
by
you.
taking it out of policy, it allows an annual review of how many kids are left. Can it be consolidated to one bus route or whatever, but it gets to be reviewed every year rather than those last two students will get a bus every year until we change policy.
Agree.
Board Member Beckham.
So to follow up on that, if I'm a student and I'm in 7th grade and I get transportation, am I going to get it through 12th grade? Can I assume that's what's going to happen? Or what you just said, I'm in 7th grade and next year I'll be in 8th grade, but SUSD is going to look at it annually, so I'm really not grandfathered in. Then I am up to whatever the decision is annually. So which of those are you looking to do? Because I'm confused. I don't know. I'm the parent. What are you looking to do?
We were unanimous that we wanted to honor the grandfathering in language, but it really ties our hands in regards to any flexibility. 8 years from now, when there's only 2 students impacted on one bus, we may make a different choice. It would allow future board members or cabinet to do that. So it just doesn't really belong in policy specifically because it was an unincorporated area and now it's another school district. So to have that policy language in there is problematic.
So I would beg to differ. I would say when you use language grandfathered in, it's, I don't know, is it a legal term? I mean, I have it in several contracts that we have. And what that means is you put a date in, grandfathered in by 2000, December 30th, 2019. So any student who is a student and uses those services as of December 30th, 2019 is grandfathered in. You have to have a date so you know what that is. That means that any student coming in enrolling after December 30th, 2019 no longer has is guaranteed that service. So therefore, I know if the intent is to truly grandfather those students in, you do that by setting the date. And therefore, anybody who comes in after that date knows that every year they will be told whether or not they have bus service or not. So I would find it very important, if I was one of those 50 students and the intent is to grandfather me in, that it would be in policy.
So if I could, we are recommending taking out this grandfathered language. I don't know that grandfathered is the right term
That's
if
what I
we're
was
talking
going to say.
about
It's
those
very
50
confusing.
students.
I agree.
But once you put a date in, it no longer is confusing. As long as you are grandfathered in, as defined as you are an enrolled student by such and such date.
But when I'm
I don't think we would
understanding
put,
you
I
get
would not recommend putting it in
transportation.
policy at all in terms of,
Would you put it in the regulation then? Where is otherwise, to be honest, you're saying to me, and that's fine too, but that's a decision to be made. You have decided that you're not grandfathering in. And what you're doing is, any student will be told annually whether they have transportation. And that's fine too, if that's the decision. Just be clear on what you're telling people. We don't want to say, oh, our intent is this, and then not honor it because it's not written down anywhere.
so, sorry, I heard three
Yeah,
different
it's okay.
about
Do
to
we want to
speak.
spend, we have 2 readings on this. We can get some data on it and when it started and how old the kids are and take a look at
And
it.
that's part of the problem, that date was not put
Right.
into this originally. I
Right.
mean, you're right, that sets the timeline moving forward, and that was not put in before. So it's yearly, every year, they're grandfathered in, as long as this is in
And
policy.
you have an issue of an unincorporated Rio Verde area is no longer that. I
Right.
mean, this language has to come out.
Well-
It's really kind of inappropriate, kind of all over the place at
Well,
this
I'm
point.
not saying that you keep the exact language, because it sounds like it does not convey what you're trying to
Right.
convey, so therefore it must be changed. But I just, once again, if you're a student and
Right.
you have said you want me to be able to finish 12th grade here and have transportation, then it's very easy. All those students who are enrolled by such and such date are grandfathered in. Anybody coming after that knows that they don't have guaranteed transportation.
And I think we can bring a recommendation back that answers that when we come back. I do want to say publicly,
What the intent
no
is.
one's trying to stop this in the middle of this school year. Those students will continue to receive transportation. And indeed, the discussions so far have been, we want to continue to support those students that are receiving that transportation in this circumstance. So we do need to talk about how do we communicate that to families and where does it belong?
Board Member Greenberg.
Yeah, and if we're going to come back and you're going to present that to us, I mean, part of that discussion might be, well, we have 50 kids, but 40 of them are juniors. So it could be that, in 2-3 years, it's basically over anyways. And I'm going to assume we probably don't have great feasibility just to send a bus out for 2 or 3 kids. But they can come, there might be a route that's close to them that they can then come to or something. So that might just be some information that the board might be interested in.
Well, I think the issue just lies in the term grandfathered in, because I think
Right.
most people interpret that as permanent,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So if you would do something like reviewed annually or something of that sort, like I said, this is a first read though, so you're going to come.
We'll come back.
Yes.
Any further questions?
Yes, I do.
Board Member Beckham?
I had made some recommendations, but I would like to talk about them because I find a couple other areas very confusing. Under enrollment priorities, I am suggesting when I brought up that when we go under these priorities, several of these, number 2, number 3, aren't really the priorities when you're looking at new open enrollments. Because once you are currently enrolled, and you stay within your feeder system, you do not come back to be, you don't have to apply for open enrollment again. You're automatic enrolled the next year. So the way that this reads is that when we look at our priorities, you'll look at the children of the district employees, and then you're looking at, I guess you changed it, number 2 became siblings of district who are currently enrolled. Okay, the siblings of the district resident students who are currently enrolled. Okay, that one's okay because it's a sibling and they have not enrolled yet. But if you go to number, which was 2, now 3, if you are a district resident student who is currently enrolled, you are no longer in that priority because by the definition you've just given us, you don't have to open enroll. So it gets a little complicated. So when I asked why were those individuals in the enrollment priority when they really shouldn't be, it was answered because when you go to the next paragraph, it talks about how if you have a reduction and then you actually do that priority list in reverse. I am wondering if it clarifies it if you broke that into 2 sections and you have, if I'm going to enroll, what is that priority list? And if I'm going to revoke, what is that priority list? Because they're not going to be the same.
So there's
Is
2
that correct or
parts
not?
to the way we answered that, actually. And the first part is that these priorities, 1 through 7, are the order in which brand-new open enrollment are taken, in that order. If you are correct that once you're in, you're in. So a district resident student who is currently enrolled, that is a student who, for example, is enrolled at Cherokee and wants to go to Hopi. So they're a district resident, but not a Hopi resident.
So they are actually transferring schools.
That's
They're
that's
asking
what
for
a
a
district
transfer.
resident transfer student is. And I don't think there's a need to list the priorities twice because the policy just talks about if we ever reduce because we don't have capacity, we'll go in reverse order from 7 to 1 instead of 1 to 7.
Okay. Just a minute, please. Such students shall be sent to the Does that make sense? So when I'm looking at it from the standpoint that I'm a student that's never enrolled in Scottsdale, and I am going to look at this list.
Okay?
And I say to myself, okay, one is, I know everybody, children of district employees have priority over me. Whether I'm in the district or I'm out of the district, they have a priority because they're number 1. I just don't know if that's true. That's why this is confusing me. Number 2, I happen to be open enrolling, and I'm going to say, I'm going to go district resident students who are currently enrolled. I'm thinking, well, I'm not realizing that that's a transfer. That only applies to transfer students. I'm thinking, oh, that must mean anybody who's currently enrolled
No.
is going to, I know that's not what happens, but that's how I'm reading it.
So the statutory language talks about resident and non-resident student. So resident student is a student that lives inside the district. So there's 2 types of resident students. One is a student that already attends a Scottsdale School District school, like Ms. Marshall said, and wants to switch schools, a transfer. That would be number 3.
Number 3.
Yeah, if I live in the district, but I'm at a charter school and I'm coming back to Scottsdale, then I would be a resident, number 4, a resident student who is not currently
Correct.
enrolled. So, and we get that resident, non-resident right from the statute.
But I don't think that that's what's confusing to me. What's confusing is that they're currently enrolled and that it's a transfer. But if no one else feels that that's confusing, then I get it. I just find it very confusing if you happen to be a parent, because you're layman, and you're trying to read this to understand it, and you have to now know that number 2 is actually only for transfers. It's not intuitive.
So this is a first read, so we'll take a look at it.
Definition.
it's not clear that it's an in-district.
If I may, I think that
Board Member
I think the specific confusion is that if you
That
read
is the
number
definition
3,
of
district resident students, we know what that is. Okay, so that's me living in the Arcadia neighborhood, right? Who are currently enrolled, makes it sound like I am currently open enrolled at the school. So I live in Arcadia, but it reads as if, oh, I'm at Desert Mountain and I have to reapply and that. So I understand the confusion. Maybe if you just add in a transfer, like if you just change it to transfers or something,
Yeah, so what's so interesting is the language used to have less categories and be
Yeah.
simplified and to try to really help with
Yeah.
understanding, but maybe it had the opposite
Yeah,
effect. So
yeah.
we'll look at it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we're ready to move on to the regulations?
Board Member Beckham.
Okay, then, let's see, the other area that I found confusing, under admission standards, you have a short paragraph, which I'm anticipating, once again, I'm looking as a parent, layman, coming in, I'm thinking you're gonna tell me what those admission standards are. And all I get is that, about if I'm, if the you can refuse to admit an expelled student, that's it. And then all of a sudden it jumps to transportation, and then it jumps to this exception area, next paragraph, which actually starts to actually talk about the standards. So I had talked about maybe rewording this so that we actually talk about admission standards under admission standards. What are those standards? And so, yes, the district will have to make a decision to be able to communicate what those standards are, and what are they? And then part of that is, one of those standards would be that we can refuse to admit it. I would take the transportation out, make it it's not in between the exception and the admission standards. And in that admission standards, you may want to look at such things that were in the statutes, like saying that you have to, what I say, if, look at only non-residents who maybe have an, well, let me see. Oh, no, that's what that looks like. You had mentioned it, that you need proof of residency, you need age and identity. I mean, those are your standards. So I don't know if the
Not really,
heading's
though.
wrong.
I understand what you're saying.
Reading this policy, I don't know what the expectations are for the standards to be able to qualify to get into your school district.
And I think we might look at changing that subtitle, as I mentioned when you asked that it's an ASBA subheading that's not that informative, because it only talks about the statute that says you can refuse to enroll someone for an expulsion from another district. It's really not about admissions. The statutes that we showed earlier are about proof of residency and then documentation of age and identity. The statute about age and identity actually says that families have to provide that within 30 days, so it's not an admission standard. It is something that we have to get a record of within 30 days, and we have to follow up with the families and follow a process if they haven't provided it within 30 days, but I wouldn't call it an admission standard. But I do think we can look at changing this subtitle. It doesn't exactly fit, because it's really not about what do you need to do to be admitted.
And I will say too, though, if I am a parent and I admit my student, are you kicking me out if I don't get you the proof of residency with it at day 45?
We have some requirements that we have to follow if families haven't given us that documentation. I'll have to follow up with you because I don't know it all off the top of my head.
Right.
But yeah, there are processes we have to follow
Then
if they
that
don't.
either needs, I believe, to be in the policy or the regulation.
I don't think I would
think
put
that
it
we
in
need to-
open enrollment policy. Let me look at the admission standards policy that is cross-referenced here and see if it makes more sense there. I wouldn't, because it's not just for open enrollment. We need that reliable proof of age and identity for all kids.
Right,
So I wouldn't put it
That
in
is
this
an
policy, but it
admission
may fit
standard.
somewhere else.
right. it's, I guess to me, that is what a standard is. I want to
Yeah.
know as a parent what you are expecting of me to be
Right.
able to provide you, as well as what is it that are there any criteria or requirements for my student to get into your school? And if there aren't any, that's fine, just state that. But if there are, then I just want to know what they are.
Michelle, I had a question from a community member about the acceptable form of, like, the lease, the
Right.
APS bill or whatever, a concern that sometimes it wasn't necessarily from the company, they were just pulling bills off the internet or whatever. What is the standard that we have for that? What is acceptable? Can someone just handwrite a lease from Office Max, or what are we accepting as?
We certainly have
Personal
seen
preference.
different forms of leases, but it's not really up to us to investigate,
Right.
to go out and investigate. If we have reason to believe that someone's not telling the truth, we can, ask, we can question. But getting into, I won't. Getting into investigating that can put us in a bad position in terms of discrimination. That doesn't mean that, the student, there's something that we observe as employees that seems wrong, and we don't follow up on that. But investigating whether a lease is correct. I mean, I'll have schools call me and ask me to look into stuff, and I will kind of behind the scenes kind of look at stuff and say, let's ask these couple of questions. But I wouldn't send our employees out to start investigating. This doesn't look right to me, and I don't think this is real.
Part of this language came from the pre-choice days, when if students lived outside of the school district, it was not uncommon for schools to want to investigate somebody giving a false address because they were not collecting tuition. Now, with open enrollment and free choice, as long as they live in the state of Arizona, it doesn't really matter where they live in the state of Arizona to be eligible to come to the school. So to find out what their address is more a clerical thing, to be able to, where you send information and where you get information. Now, unless it's a transportation issue of 20 miles and you want to figure that out. But the language really is, I would say, kind of out of date based on open enrollment and choice.
Doesn't it touch on some athletic issues, though, eligibility? And
Yeah, it definitely can have implications
But,
for
but,
AIA.
but for example, if you come, the school, if you come from Avondale to Saguaro as a freshman, it doesn't matter where you went to 8th grade. That is your school. Now, if you go from Saguaro back to Avondale or Goodyear or someplace, then they need to know that. But that's school attendance, not where you go now. If you come to Saguaro as a junior and you are from out of district, you have to show during the registration process and right afterward, transcript showing where you went to school last. So it's more about, when it comes to eligibility, where your school was, your last school, than it is where you live.
I was going to say, in light of declining enrollment, and every district I know of is in that position, there's not any concern, literally, over whether the student is out of district or not. It's an ADM. I mean, and years ago, that was not the situation, as Dr. Pickard called. But now, in light of declining enrollment, every district I know of is, if you tell me you live here, that's fine. I mean, that's, live with a relative, doesn't matter. I mean, that's practicality of how they're dealing with that subject right now, is because everybody wants students.
I wouldn't say that that's how we treat it. We do care what's going on with the student. If we see some things that look off, this happens with school employees all the time. I get these calls all the time. Hey, I feel like something's not right here. Is this a call law enforcement situation? Is this, we talk through these things because although I don't want our employees to feel like they need to go investigate where someone lives, it's not just a simple matter of,
Board Member Beckham.
And it isn't. In all due respect, I completely understand how the choice changed, and we will educate any Arizona resident but it's in state statute. And that's because they want us to have a legal document stating they are in Arizona residents. So it
Yeah.
is vitally important that we have that paperwork. I
Right.
believe it is. as a
And we
board member.
definitely have people coming from other
The
states
other
that
reason
we do
that
charge
it is
tuition for.
important is because it designates whether they are a resident or if they are let me get the correct wording here, if they are a resident student, a resident transfer student, or a non-resident student. And yes, I would love to believe that everybody would be honest and have the highest integrity. But given that there is a priority, there will be people that will not follow that, which is the other reason why we should have a legal document stating where people are living, so that it is clear for that family as well as us, and we are fair and just in making the decisions we do. So I would have to say that it's very important for me as a board member that those are legal documents and that they're, that the expectation and the transparency of what those are in these, somewhere in these two documents, so people know what to.
And the great thing
to
is we
expect.
have, statute and forms from ADE that say what those are. So
Right.
it's not just us making it up.
I think Board President Beckman's question is what she's heard is that there are families that are not providing correct information because they're just making a copy off of an email or off the internet. And therefore, maybe that should not be an acceptable
That's right.
piece of
So,
paper
so
for
the
us to
question
accept.
becomes for the poor registrar who is just trying to do his or her job, investigating that is not what I would recommend. I would continue to have the conversations that we have on a regular basis with our staff who are taking in these documents. Hey, this doesn't look right. Can we talk about, what else is going on here?
And I see that, and to follow up on what Board Member Beckman was saying, I agree. They shouldn't be investigating anything.
No.
But that's why if we're clear in what the documents are, then it is or it isn't, right? I mean, it's either your actual APS bill or your actual
Right.
lease, or it's not.
And I will
So-
say, there are some landlords who
Yeah.
get those same forms off the internet because they don't have a lawyer or,
That's still a lease,
you know.
though. Yeah, I mean, a lease is a lease. You can't investigate whether
Yeah.
he's a real person or whatever. I get that, but
But often when it is something that's not legit, there's other observations in that interaction with the family. And so that's where we're having discussions among ourselves, what's the next step here? Is this a problem? Is the child safe?
And that is the right way to do it. I think, coming back to your point, what we're trying to do is solve that problem that the registrar is having to make some decision. It either is or isn't, and if it isn't,
Right.
then it's easy. You don't have all your paperwork together, so we can't accept this application, or we don't, even though you
Right.
got into open enrollment, you're not going to be able to open enroll
Right.
because we don't have the proper paperwork. And that's kind of the end of the discussion. And most people will go out and get the correct paperwork,
Right.
knowing that there's a definitive answer there.
further
And-
questions?
And I was just going to say, anything else on the policy, and then we can move on to the regulation if there's nothing else on the policy? Oh,
Oh, Board Member Perlberg.
I just going to want to clarify, because Dr. Guerin, you said something about, and it's going back to our enrollment priorities. I apologize for going backwards. But the seven priorities, correct me if I heard you, and that, and I know that they weren't seven, so there were like 3 or something in the past. But I would say that there was a lot of conversations, a lot of frustrations and confusion for a lot of years that led us to these 7 priorities. They're divided out for a lot of good reasons. So I definitely encourage making them as clear as possible what those differences are. District resident students who are currently enrolled in SUSD schools, whatever. But the 7 priorities, there's a reason they're divided out. So I just wanted to.
Absolutely, and
kinda-
Ms. Perleberg, the principal said that they are working.
Yeah, thank you.
We asked them, is this priority list working for you? Is it clear? And they said yes.
Perfect, okay, thank you, just wanted to clarify.
December 2nd, yes, okay. Okay, so I've pulled up the regulation that we're recommending. The eligibility section is kind of a list of open enrolled families and students should understand, subject to capacity, there's limited transportation possibly available, agree to abide by code of conduct, maintaining attendance standards, regular attendance, punctual attendance, and noting that we're not guaranteeing athletic eligibility, which often can be a question in these situations. It also states that providing false information will result in a denial or revocation of the enrollment. The deadlines, when we sat down with each of you, we had a much more complicated document. And then we sat down with the Student Information and Records Department, and they said, that's not how this goes. So forgive us, but that's why this is a little different from what we sat down with you with. We were advised that the application is due December 2nd each year, and that those submitted after the deadline will be considered after those that have met the deadline. Notification, we were told, is in writing by December 20th. So that simplified that quite a bit. We had it broken out from a conversation several years ago between grade levels, and this made it a lot more simple. Let's see. Enrollment after acceptance. So we heard from principals that they understood it to be a 10-day deadline. A family's notified, you're accepted for open enrollment, you have 10 days to get us your completed documentation. We did have some language in a previous version that said 1 week or 7 school days or something like that, but we went with the 10 school days. Principals seemed to appreciate that as a good timeline, so we kept that in there. Administrative transfers, we've talked over the years with principals about how this works, in particular with high school principals in my conversations, about not making those transfers after March 1 without superintendent approval. And they also, both the sending and receiving principal need to agree to that transfer. So as I understand it, and Dr. Sakos will correct me if I'm wrong, they typically have a conversation about whether they're both going to agree before it happens. Status of open enrolled students. Under this section, it basically says is the once you're in policy. You don't have to reapply every year. One of the more recent changes we had made to this is regarding those students who are enrolled in an SUSD pre-K program. Some may remember that the discussion was what we wanted to do was roll students up from pre-K with as little fuss and muss as possible. We want you to continue in our school. So this language is designed to say, if you are at a pre-K at a particular elementary school, you are just going to roll up to kindergarten at that same school. You do have to do the open enrollment if you want to go to a different school, and we do need you to do some different documentation than you do when you enroll for pre-K, just because it's different documentation that's required. So we tried to make that as clear as possible. Newer is this last section, I think it's the last, guidelines for revocation of open enrollment. And as we will pull up next, we're recommending an exhibit called that, Guidelines for Revocation of Open Enrollment. It's a process that's been in place for 3-4 years. Immediately on our phone calls, principals were like, yes, it's working, keep it. So we were really happy to hear that. Right now what they do is if they want to look at revoking an open enrollment, they, guided by the form, which we'll pull up later, they go through what are the conversations we've had with the family, what are the interventions we've tried, depending on what the issue is. And we have provisions for, in high school, if it's an academic issue, they're not on track to graduate, what are we doing to assist them? Or maybe this isn't the environment that's going to get them there. discipline, if there's excessive discipline, failure to comply with the code of conduct, and then excessive absences. When we developed this form, we were cognizant that sometimes there's other issues going on, so we specifically ask in the form, does the student have an IEP or 504? You know, have you made those inquiries that you need to do, including if it's behaviors, have you done a manifestation determination to determine whether the conduct is based on the student's disability, and what are the interventions you've tried in terms of behavior plans? That was a mouthful. And currently, the principals are going to our Executive Director for Student Support Services, Dr. Chestnut, so we put that right in there in the regulation. And what they do is they submit their documentation and they have a conversation with Dr. Chestnut, and he will approve or ask them to go back and do some more. This is designed to provide due process to the student so that they have notice and an opportunity to correct the issue. And so what we're hoping is that families are having discussions and they're not just suddenly being told, okay, your enrollment's over. So we can either talk about this document and/or I'll pull up the exhibit. I'll go ahead and pull up the exhibit while you're looking. Oops.
One simple
Board member
question.
Fuller.
Yes.
Simple little question. Do we, I've seen a lot of administration, you know, what's it called, charts or trees of
seen a lot of administration.
positions. I've seen a lot of administration. Do we always have an executive director for student support services?
We have
Or
for
is that
quite
title-
some time.
Okay.
Dr. Sackos held the seat for several years.
All right, titles
With different
change,
hats and different
I-
responsibilities under there,
Okay.
The
but
nice thing about regulation,
Exactly.
if that title changed, we could change the regulation without having to go through.
Well, okay.
we did again think of
Orders of
superintendent's designee, and because it was a regulation, we
Director of
felt more
First
comfortable
Impressions.
saying that.
Yeah.
And it has been a position for quite some time.
Okay, fair enough. Had to ask.
So this is the exhibit. Like I said, this has actually been a process in place for a few years, but we like the idea of posting an exhibit right there with the policy and the regulation. People can see it all in one place. Here's what we use as a process if somebody is looking at revoking an open enrollment.
Yeah, Board Member Beckham. Regarding this guideline, this is for staff, right?
Yes.
Because you're not anticipating a parent to
No.
understand this. So if that is part of the intent, we might want just a one-page narrative stating what the process is. There is an advantage to letting the parents know what that process is up front versus after everything's been done, them finding out what the process was.
Right.
So you might, if the intent is to have the parent understand this, we might need a narrative.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Board Member Greenberg?
I think I just have a general comment as to our open enrollment policy. I know open enrollment has been a hot topic this year in light of capacity, questions of capacity, and we've been asked to review this policy by our constituents, our community members, parents, and I think that capacity issues are always a fair question if students don't have desks or there are not enough books, and that is something that we take very seriously, and administration takes very seriously in reviews, and sometimes we make mistakes. Usually, I think for the overwhelming majority, we do a great job and make sure our students have all the resources and teachers are well-staffed and everyone's happy. But I did just want to say that, insofar as open enrollment is concerned, where discussions verge into questions of, allowing and not allowing students, and can we get rid of students in a different way from how we, might discipline students in our own district, I do get very concerned, because at the end of the day, these are all children, and they're children who have decided with their families to come to our schools and want that opportunity for many different reasons. And the main reason we discussed in our meeting, whether we should really, whether our principals and administration should be treating students differently merely based on where they live. You know, the main comfort I have in this really is simply that a revocation of open enrollment is not something that goes on the record. But if it were something that went on their record and could harm them, I would probably be very against treating our students differently, because as I say, you know, they are kids. Our job is to educate them. Kids come from many different backgrounds, and they come from far and wide across our state to be at our schools. And in many ways, that's probably because I view education more of a right than a privilege. But you know, I just wanted to make that clear, because this has been a topic that's come up quite a lot, that I personally view every student as important. And you know, were it not for this very awkward difference between a regular form of discipline and revocation, I probably would be against it. But I appreciate all the hard work for the years that our administration has put into creating that form, making sure that we're going through pretty much the same processes, you know, 501 plans, making sure the IDEA is followed, and thank you for that.
Board Member Beckham.
To follow up on that, and I agree with you, once you're open enrolled, you are a student here. So should it not be guidelines for revocation of an attending student? It's not really open enrollment. This is I assume this is the guideline that is used for all of our students.
No,
Is that correct?
It
or
isn't, no.
Oh, it's not.
If a resident student is going to be revoked, it's an expulsion, and that's the process. And that is a possibility for those who have been open enrolled, but the request over the years has been to do a different kind of process for those who were originally open enrolled. And so that's how this developed.
So not here, but I would like to know what that difference is then, because I didn't understand that there was a big difference in the two.
Okay.
So one last thing, and I know you touched on it briefly, when they are, I know we have quite a bit on our registrars. We talked about that, you mentioned that, I'm hearing about that. And we were discussing, you know, streamlining this process to make it more understandable so it's easier for them. And I have heard that it is constantly difficult for them to receive the paperwork in and then to be go chasing back for other documents, transcripts, et cetera. And I know we're trying to address this. But one of the suggestions Board Member Beckham had made that I did like was this, the packet with a checklist for what's in the packet. Do we have something like this on the website, or could we do something like, I know as a parent, I would appreciate knowing exactly what I needed to fill out and be able to check it off as, you know, as to make it easier for everyone involved.
I believe we have the information, but I like the idea of doing it as a checklist. So we can certainly add that. The other, you just reminded me that one other thing that we've been discussing is, you know, we had enrollment at the sites, centralized enrollment, back out to the sites, is the need for us to sort of go on tour once this is approved, and make sure that our staff have the updated training and get to ask those questions like, you know, I had this situation, what should I have done? You know, those have always been really useful. So we've talked about that as part of our process here.
And
Can I make
Dr.
one-
Bachna does a lot to support.
Yeah. I just want to make one comment to follow up with President Beckman's statement. So at the high school level, what's important to note that we can certainly have that checklist, like bring your transcript, bring, you know, all of these different items, so to expedite the scheduling process. But in all cases, the registrar still has to fill out a records request from the school to get an official transcript.
Right.
So that we don't have altered transcripts, and so that work will still exist. The benefit of having it on the front end, if it's accurate, is that we wouldn't have to do a schedule change. So sometimes it's guessing with high school students what schedules they go into, and then it's like, oh, well, they didn't pass Algebra 1, you know, we're not going to put them in Geotrig, they have to go back to Algebra 1. So that is, I think, the biggest difference, but it's important to note that this
alone will not lessen the responsibility or the work of the registrar, because they still have to do that formal records request.
Sure, I just meant from the parent's perspective of walking in and you think you have everything and they say, oh, but no, you didn't see, you have to have this and this as well. It's very simplistic, but for me, it would help if I was
Absolutely.
that parent. Absolutely.
For all registration materials.
Right.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely.
Board Member Beckham?
And if that is something that is adopted, then I think possibly we might want to go back to the policy and under page 2, where we say the packet will be made available to everyone who requests it, we might want to say the packet would be provided to every applicant, so that those tie together if that decision is made. I would also like, and thank you for bringing that up, because I was going to bring that up, is I would like to understand the deadlines. So as I'm reading it now, because I had the old one, is that there is only one deadline. And that means that if I want to open, and I know I want to go to school in the fall at SUSD, I open enroll by December 2nd. And therefore, by the 20th, I will know if I'm on a wait list, I've been accepted or rejected. I get my application, I move here, I move in on December 5th. I make my application on December 5th. What happens then? So,
If you live in the attendance area of the school.
no, live outside the attendance, I'm doing an open enrollment. Where do I read how that applies to me? So that I will know what that is.
Dr. Bachman, do you want to?
Well, I read this to say any application received after December 2nd deadline will be placed on a wait list.
Okay?
So we have
And then what
rounds,
happens?
so it'd be the next round, but let's have her.
Do we then have a notification? Because then I'm going to go to
We-
that notification. When would I get notified?
You'd be put into like what they call, we don't, using the word priority 2. So we continuously review applications as they come in. If you apply for open enrollment during November, you're priority 1. Anytime after December 2nd, you're priority 2, and so forth. So you're reviewed on a first come, first served basis.
And
So
it's
it
an
should be.
ongoing review.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I could be,
It's open right now, so it's constantly open.
so is there any notification point that you have internally that says you will get to it within 30 days? Or
I'd have to check
or-
the exact verbiage, but yes, there's continuous process where we ask the registrars to keep an eye on those, on that queue and keep notifying families so that they can, because they're not just indicating their first choice school for open enrollment, they're indicating their second choice and their third choice. So we need them to go in and release those records so the second choice can have the chance to pick up the student.
Right, so if all of a sudden first choice is full, you call and say you can go to second chance, they may say, no, I don't want to, just put me back on the wait list for my number 1 choice.
Absolutely.
So then, to me then, that's this ongoing from December 2nd forward. How do you staff properly? Since it's ongoing, and at any point on February 15th, you could get 100 applications, or on March 15th or April 15th. So is there something that we could do in our policy to help our staff with staffing?
Do you mean like-
Before there were all these dates, now there's just one, and I'm just making sure that
Staffing is.
that's had forethought into helping with staffing.
And I will say, before there were all these dates is actually not
Oh, that wasn't.
really reality. We had it wrong.
Okay.
So
Let me
just
answer
that
the
clarification.
question. Staffing is done then on the December 2nd notification. Those people who have been accepted can come in. And staffing is done around the 1st of January, in that time from January. Last year, it was right after the 1st of the year. This year will be around the same time after. So we'll have the December 2nd people in. We'll have those that have said yes, that they accept that, and then that goes into the numbers, into the formula for staffing. Then, after the school begins to be, the schedule is being made, and they see, well, we have room across the board in our junior class. So then they go to the wait list and go by priority, and then say, we'll take juniors. Or in the case of an elementary school, it's probably simpler. We have room in 3rd grade, you can see it. And so then they go to that wait list at that time. but the school staffing is done, and that's why the December 2nd date, as Dr. Guerin said, is so important, so that we get the number in so that we can use one set number for the staffing formula, and that's based on the December 2nd admissions.
I need to process that, since this is one of the questions that I had.
Board Member Kravitz, did you
I just didn't know if what you were getting at was, is there a cutoff date for accepting open
Right,
enrollment?
so that all of a sudden you don't have 100
So that you
people
can-
applying, or, come June 1, and you're scrambling to staff, or, that's what I'm trying to
Well, I
understand.
think that's where, getting the open enrollment figure from the report from the superintendent saying we have this room in this school, and then once you reach that, you're closed to open enrollment.
Correct, but that does not help you with staffing, because if you've got 300 students and only 100 are filled by December 20th, because that's when you would know, right? Well, no, you're really not going to know your acceptance until January. Well, I have a question to that. If we're telling people on the 20th, and they have to get information in 10 days.
10 school days.
10 school days, okay, good. So by January 15th, we'll know who is actually enrolled for our staff. Yet, if all of a sudden we get an influx, we just have to be nimble and start hiring if all of a sudden 100, 150 students.
Nimble is
come
the
in.
word, and the work
Okay.
that happens in HR in such a short period of time is remarkable.
Any further questions? Board Member Beckham has one.
I found some of the wording as far as a layperson to be difficult to understand in the regulations, so I'll go over some of that with you afterwards. Thanks.
Any other discussion or question from board members? Nope. Thank you so much. Okay, Dr. Creekard, we are now moving on to information discussion item 4, Navajo.
Thank you, President Beckman, members of the board. As a periodic update is always helpful. Mr. Rayler has volunteered to give you a little bit of where we are on Navajo Elementary School. Mr. Rayler.
Good evening, President Beckman, members of the board, Dr. Creekard. Before I get started, Navajo has been probably the single most difficult project I've ever done. It has been a matter of patching back to something that was already there 50 years ago. It's been dicing the new to the old. It's been a lot of things that have been extremely unpleasant. It has also been a very significant challenge to maintain the budget. Pictures that people have not seen up until now. This is the room that burned, that has caused so much grief for so many people. These were pictures the morning of. Water from the firefight down the hallway, down that main corridor in the B building, and into some of the classrooms. The adjacent bathrooms in the hallway on the B building. And for a visual of how the fire affected the school. The fire was in a small area. The water affected much more area, and the smoke filled with asbestos and lead filled considerably more. A, B, and C building has been the primary focus of the project, although systems like intercom, data, fire alarm, all of those things have to be upgraded because they don't interconnect between the fire burned area and the other buildings. So to just kind of bring back the timeline of how things happened, when they happened, February 7th, I came back to the board with a memo that I had written to Dr. Creekard and Mr. Gadd about other things that the trust wouldn't be covering. This was something we talked about, getting rid of the asbestos, making sure that when we brought the kids back, the building was nice and safe. Then I came back again February 12th, and we kind of summarized some of the other work that I felt necessary to bring the rest of the buildings up to standard. Some of the things we did not talk about during that discussion was $870,000 worth of professional services, and that's really just a placeholder of dollars, and replacing furniture, fixtures, and equipment. Although the trust did a great job of cleaning the products that were in the fire, there is some resistance, and it's a STEAM program. So we thought that if the budget's available, be a nice idea to bring some of that furniture up to showcase the STEAM program. So the layout of the dollars that we're committed to at this point, the XCO, something that's been thrown around quite a bit, is the dollars that the trust is paying to the contractor, and at some point the district will reimburse. That original $131,000 ask, the GCON, we actually had 4 general contractors that bid on the project, and district's portion of that project is $3.2 million at this point. And then design, services, restoration, and remodel, we look like we're going to be about $375,000. Because of this, the way this restoration is going, the structural engineers, the electrical engineers, the mechanical engineers have been much more involved on almost a daily basis to answer the questions necessary to keep the job moving forward. So as the project started to progress, one of the things was, and I can take you back to the memo, there was a couple line items in there for exterior lead containing paint abatement and the interior walls lead abatement. And at the time, we didn't accept them. And we didn't accept them because you can manage those in place. The longer I walked through that building, the more I spent time in that building. I just didn't think that was the right thing to do, was to put everything back in place and leave it and leave that lead paint in there. So fortunately, that January 25th memo showed a line item of $248,790 for that interior lead paint plaster wall removal. We waited. I made a decision kind of in the 11th hour, and we ended up paying $77,500. The reason we paid $77,500 is that they were able to do a T-clip. It's a type of test, and it determines the kind of disposal that you have to do. In this case, we decided to throw everything away, the wood, the plaster, and the paint, the lead paint itself, and that allowed us to a threshold in which we could just throw it away in a regular dump. So they did that testing. We were allowed to throw it away in a regular dump, and therefore we saved a ton of money doing that project. So now what you're going to get is a building that has all brand new walls inside and no lead-based paint. So D and F, 2 buildings that were not associated with the fire, but 2 buildings that we're going to put kids back in, wanted to make sure that we got our asbestos resolved in there as well. We have to have oversight at $53,000 for Dominion. And then some of the items that were in my original ask, the C&I show hardware and security at $105, lawn tech, moving furniture from place to place that wasn't responsibility of the trust, and then moving electrical, the service entrance section from the north side of the C building into the G building. So got that in a more appropriate place to sustain that building. So up until this point, with these items, we're at $4,067,906. As we have done with Cherokee and Hohokam, we have met with a small visioning committee at Navajo, talking about their campus, talking about the problems that they're going to have when they come back. And one of the things we did was we brought a civil engineer on board to look at the bus parking. Currently, buses unload on Camelback. They do not have a bus loop, a separate bus loop. City of Scottsdale darn near gave us a hug when we suggested that we'd like to take the buses off of Camelback. Parents dropping off, every school we have, there isn't a school that we don't have that doesn't have queuing problems, getting kids onto campus in a timely fashion without traffic backing up forever and ever. So we've tried addressing all of that, although I have not brought the balance of that project. We've got the design that we've taken care of, but we're still looking at adjacent ways costs that can be attributed to this project and where we're at in total for the budget. So in today's consent agenda, although I realized as I was sitting back there waiting my turn that somehow my Arizona Furnishings fixtures and equipment didn't land on the board agenda. But you do have the Skyline Builders Restoration and exterior lead paint stabilization and painting. And that one, again, another line item that we didn't originally accept at $216,000. My original budget of exterior painting at $125, with our total ask of $271, looks like we're going to avoid about $70,000 worth of costs by doing it the way that I'm suggesting. So at this point, we, assuming the two items slated for approval, we're at $4,580,744. You can see the graffiti on the walls. That's part of the process for painting. We're actually going to sandblast the brick, bring it back to its old nice red color, get rid of a lot of the graffiti. Picture on the left is the framing of the classrooms, completely redone. And the picture on the right is the brand new mechanical equipment for the entire campus. More framing, air conditioning. The one in the middle is what they call a VAV box, and it basically modulates the air going into the classroom. All brand new ductwork. And just to show again that my $4.5 million is still under the total number that I have available for Navajo at this point, at 5.337. Questions? Oh, before you ask. We are still on schedule. We are still planning on moving them back over winter break. I don't like winter break anyways. So that's the plan at this point. And then we should be back again right after winter break to talk a little bit more about Navajo.
Board Member Greenberg.
You just answered my first question, but my second question is, are we expected to go over the 5.3 million currently or not?
I'm doing my level best not to. There's still a lot of hanging chads, if you will, with the trust and what they're paying for. There's a lot of moving parts. I never thought it would be so challenging to understand and to negotiate. They've been great to work with, but they have a job to do, we have a job to do, and we're working together well. Debbie Spalding's been working on the IT component, and I think we're going to get there. But at this juncture, I'd like to have the rest of winter break, and then we'll continue arm wrestling, and then come back again in January or February with some final numbers.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. It might be for Mr. Gadd, though. I don't know. With regard to the procurement process, and reimbursing the trust. How is that different, and how are we following everything correctly with our vendors?
The trust is a function of insurance
Right.
coverage. And there's an agreement with the trust, with the insurance coverage on this particular project for some level of reimbursement. So that will satisfy the procurement process because it's an insurance-related claim. And that's somewhat exempted from the procurement code because of the agreement with the insurance carrier.
But
So
even the
that's-
portion that we are doing that's not part of the insurance claim, that's more my question.
Those costs, I think Mr. Railer responded that most of those separate contracts, we are awarding ourselves. Some are reimbursement, depends upon which makes the most sense, and whether we can save money by doing it ourselves rather than involving the trust. But it's a negotiation, as he indicated, about which items we are going to deal with a reimbursement, and they will include with GCON, and which items we decide that we can do and do it more inexpensively. So that is part of that whole negotiation. If you look at the procurement code, insurance-related claims are exempted from that subject, so that's the statute or the rule reference that we're using.
And those that we decide that we will do ourselves, we
Right.
will follow normal procurement.
That's correct.
procedure.
So those that we decide to do, as Dr. Picard just said, we do the procurement process. Those that they do, we deal with a reimbursement process to GCON.
Okay, thank you.
If I may.
Yes.
So there was a question about the procurement piece. Susan Siegel, we had a conversation. We actually went to the Attorney General's office, spoke to them, made sure that they were aware of the process that we were following, made sure that they were comfortable with the process that we were following, and they were. We thought they were going to take days and maybe even weeks to give us an answer. They actually called us back and sent us an email within a couple hours that we were doing it the right way. So,
And as a just point, that was all because of Dennis, the way he explained the whole project.
Thank you.
We wouldn't have gotten it that way without Dennis.
I appreciate that. The second question for you, unless I'm cutting you off. Were you going to say something?
well, just to reassure you that all other projects, they're either on Mojave, they're on a SAVE contract, they're all on some kind of contract. So the CRS projects, they're on Mojave. So we use the Mojave contract. Anything over $100,000, as you saw, the last two items are coming back to the board for approval. So as long as I'm within my budget that you've authorized, and I'm not going over $100,000, I'm doing the work. As soon as I hit that $100,000 mark, then I'm coming back to the board to ask for permission to award that
And that
project.
goes into my next question. Refresh my memory. We approved 4.25 million, if I recall,
It was actually 4.257.
and you're estimating you have budget capacity, or for the scope is 5.2?
Right. I like to always leave a little bit of something
That's
for
your
me in case
contingency
I
and-
make a
and-
mistake once a
Okay.
year.
All
So,
right.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Greenberg.
The board president just raised one question I do have. When the trust is procuring something for us in this rebuild project and we are to reimburse them, do we have any say in what they procure? I mean, what if they procure
Yes.
the most unnecessarily expensive?
They won't. No, they use a phrase called like, kind, and quality. So if this carpet, for instance, was part of the claim, and this carpet cost $21 a yard to replace, they're not, if I said, well, hey, I'd like this $28 a yard carpet, they would say, pass, I'll give you
Right.
21.
Right.
So those are some of the things that we have to deal with technology, and Debbie's been great about helping us with this. Technology, whatever you bought 2 days ago, you might not be able to get a year from now, because technology is constantly moving forward. So there's been a lot of discussion about how we can replace what was in there with what's up to date, and how that cost could not necessarily be like, kind, and quality, but to know that it can't be replaced in its old form. So the trust has been great about that, and I think we're in a good place as far as all of that's concerned.
Yeah, I should just rephrase it. I didn't mean that they would be, I just meant regarding inflated prices for items and those types of things that you've answered the question, but I just wanted to make sure that that was my point. Thank you.
One more question, Dennis. You're so busy. When I have you here, I have to ask you. So can you talk about the D building for a minute? You are taking that to what level? I know we didn't factor it in because we're not putting students in it, because we.
Correct.
Right now.
So
Can you speak to that?
the D building, Mr. Patzloff and I went through the school, placed all his teachers in A, B, and C, had a few spare rooms. So they're going to be comfy and cozy in A, B, C, the library, the band room, the what's the Panda building, and the gymnasium, music room, whatever it might be. So the D building, because we were seeing some escalation in costs, we decided not to go ahead and fully renovate that as part of this. We're gonna do the asbestos abatement, get that out of the way. We're going to put the fire sprinklers in because we need to protect the building. We're gonna put the fire alarm in because, again, we need to protect the building. We're going to do the paint because it'd be kind of odd not to do the paint on the outside of the rest of them and leave that one. But we are not redoing the finishes, the flooring, the ceiling tile, the lighting, all of that. So it won't be a usable building, but in the event they do grow, we can pretty easily finish that renovation and deal with it then.
Or if we have an alternate use for that building, you can adjust more easily, having not finished.
Absolutely, because the asbestos abatement is essentially going to gut that building. All the drywall will be out, all the millwork will be out, all the ceiling tile will be out. So it's going to be a shell, very much like A, B, and C look like, or had looked like several weeks ago.
I would be interested to know, and probably the board, at some point, not tonight, obviously, but what you would estimate, just a ballpark of what it would cost to finish that building? Not now, I'm not asking that, but just so we would know.
I can give you that
Someday
answer.
if we wanted to use that for, what we were looking at.
So basically, the credit that we got from GCON for that was about $340,000. So depending on how you repurpose that building would depend how much the cost was, but when we decided not to do the work, that's what they gave us back.
Thank you. Board Member Beckman.
So was the 340 part of the original ask for the 4,000,002?
Originally, the bid came in,
February, when we
yes, that
approved it.
340 was all part of the original bid from GCON.
And so when was the decision made not to complete Building 2 then? Building D, I'm sorry.
It was after Mr. Patzloff and I met and talked about his needs for the building. And then as we were trying to do, because one of the things I was trying to save some money somewhere to be able to do this bus drop-off and the extension of the parent queuing and all of that. So trying to do something that will really help the school versus something that will pretty much sit vacant or have some other folks from district move into. So we were trying to accomplish something that would truly affect the school in a positive way by doing that. And we'll come back in January and have that discussion about the bus loop and the parking and the playgrounds and all of that.
Any further questions? Thank you, Dennis.
You're very welcome.
Moving to discussion item C, Dr. Precard.
This is the discussion long promised, and as part of our goals, the update on the achievement metrics. Again, this involves both test scores and some other metrics as well. And given now, because we're more likely to have most of the data, right? Dr.
Yes.
Bachman.
Thank you. So yes, here we are to update the achievement metrics. Dr. Guerin will also be contributing to this presentation. To start with, the history of our achievement metrics. During the 2016-2017 school year, Dr. McCauley, my predecessor, worked with the board and with cabinet members to develop a tool that allows us to create a more complete picture of student achievement that goes beyond the state assessment data that I presented to you last month. This tool includes some of that state assessment data, but it also includes other information. Last November, I came to you with the board with a presentation using Dr. McCauley's tool as it was initially developed. After that presentation, I spent December and January working with cabinet members to update and refine the instrument. What Dr. Guerin and myself are presenting to you today is this revised instrument that also includes data from the 2018-2019 school year. The information you'll see today is broken out by grade level and overall. We will briefly review the highlights from each area, followed up with a look at our next steps for using this data to inform instructional practice. With that, let's get to the results. So what you're seeing here are the results of 4 years in preschool metrics. The first column shows the metric being measured in the numbered line. The information progresses chronologically from left to right in the columns for each school year. So 2015-16 school year data, 2016-17, and so forth, with the final column being the data from last school year. A highlight on this slide is row 1, where you're seeing that SUSD's preschool literacy scores continue to be very high. The test that's being shown here is the results of a test called Teaching Strategies Gold. The skills that are covered on this test include phonological awareness, alphabet knowledge, and comprehension. What you're seeing, also a focus on the slide in line number 3, is preschool in-district matriculation to kindergarten for kindergarten eligible students. In other words, this is our capture rate. This is the percentage of our students that are in the spring, were preschoolers with us, that show up for school in the fall with us in kindergarten. You see that we're holding steady right now the last 3 years at a rate of 82% capture of our preschoolers. I know that the communications and marketing team is hard at work preparing for kindergarten roundup with the intent of encouraging these preschoolers to enroll with us, as well as attracting families from outside the district that would be interested in enrolling with us as well for kindergarten next year.
Would you like to take questions during or after?
I can, go ahead.
Okay, Board Member Beckham?
I was just wondering, how many students do we have in preschool?
I don't know off the top of my head, I'd have to get back to you. I think approximately right now, I'd say 720, but I'd have to look at that.
That's fine, just to give them that number.
Okay. Okay, this next slide is elementary metrics. So this is looking at our elementary population. You can see in line 5 that the combined percentage of 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade passing AZ Merit ELA scores are at a 4-year high of 71% during last school year. So again, this is combining those 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade results into one number, percent passing. On line 5, you're seeing the results of our AIM Science in 4th grade. This is just 4th grade over time. We do have a slight decrease in that, showing last year at a percent passing of 78%. The Teaching and Learning Department are working on training teachers in the transition to the new science standards, as well as encouraging schools to teach science daily. Moving on to the middle school metrics. You can see at number 9 that we've seen a small, steady increase in the percentage of our students taking rigorous coursework during middle school. So what you're seeing in that row, number 9, is last year we had 23% of our middle schoolers were taking either world language or high school mathematics courses. That's what that number encompasses. On line 12, you're seeing a combined AZ Merit 7th and 8th grade math scores have gone up steadily over time from 2015-16 at 41% passing to last year at 51% passing. And these are the grade level testers. This isn't including the kids that were testing off grade level in Algebra 1. This is just, that's the straight percentage of the testing on grade level. Finally, in line 13, what you're seeing is our capture rate of our 8th to 9th grade matriculation rate, and it's pretty solid. We're capturing almost 9 out of 10 8th graders. They're choosing to stay with us and come back and enroll in our high schools.
Board Member Kravitz?
You did want questions as you go, or do you want
Go
me to
ahead.
wait? You had 5th grade to 6th grade matriculation, and you have 8th to 9th, but I'm wondering what the 6th to 7th is, because are we losing students in 7th grade?
I'll look at that. I haven't looked at it. I did it based on the break in grade levels, so going from elementary to middle, and the middle to high. Yeah, but I can look at that for you. Sure.
Thank you.
Yep. Let's move on to high school metrics. We actually have quite a few high school metrics. What you're seeing here is, I'm focusing right now on number 18. You can see that the percentage of high school students taking honors, dual enrollment, AP, and/or IB courses last year was 73%. So a lot of our students are choosing to take rigorous coursework. You also see our math scores presented in lines 14, 15, and 16. Those are our AZ merit math scores over time. And we see that they've been kind of varied, and we've always talked about already what the interest in high school math in terms of taking the motivation to take AZ merit. A focus going forward with our math curriculum implementation across all grade levels. Continuing on with our high school metrics, I want to draw your attention to lines 27 and 28, and then I'm going to somehow. Okay, lines 27 and 28. This is good news. The percentage of our students getting higher scores on AP exams has gone up over the last year to 65%. These are the students that are getting 3s, 4s, and 5s on those exams. But also important to note is the number of students choosing to take the AP exams has gone up over time. Looking at line 28, you can see in 2015-16 we had over 1,400 students testing, but last year we had over 1,700 students testing. So an increase of almost 300 students taking these tests. Another highlight I want to point out to you on this slide is row number 31. Right now, when I check our 4-year graduation rate for last year, school year, we're at 93% for the class of 2019. That's up 6-7% from 2015-16. It's a good number. Finally, we have the overall metrics for our school district. These are a combination of growth percentiles, but also looking at Izella scores. I wanted to bring your attention to rows 35 and 36. Our Izella scores last year, and that's our test for English language learners that we give to our English language learners, our results were up from the previous school year by 4%. As well as the number of students that were progressing and going up in a level on Izella, where they're making progress towards proficiency, was up to 48% last year. I have to mention Tonalea had over half of their English language learner testers move up a level on the language exam, and they also are the school that tests our most English language learners. So they saw some really good growth last year at Tonalea on this particular measure. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Guerin.
Thank you, Dr. Bachna. So when we get this amount of data and we look at these data metrics, the obvious question is, so now what? What do we do to impact instruction? What do we do to move forward? So we are working together in educational services, both with assessment, teaching and learning, special education, community education, and we're working hand in hand with Dr. Hagigat, Dr. Sakos, and all the building principals. And what we're going to do with this data metrics is start to develop some SMART goals. So I'm sure you are very familiar with SMART goals, but SMART goals are very specific in that they're strategic. What are we really trying to accomplish? They need to be measurable. We need to be able to look at this data and determine if we're really able to move forward before we come to you a whole year later. So what is our progress over time? They need to be attainable and achievable. They need to be relevant to us as educators. What's really important? We could write a goal for every single measure, but we know we have to be strategic in what we can accomplish and what we can focus. So we're going to do that in a very careful, thoughtful way with stakeholders, and they need to be time-bound. We need to set some progress monitoring goals on ourselves where we're reflecting back if we're achieving those goals. So it's very important that we take this comprehensive approach. Now, I could sit here and present to you some SMART goals based on Dr. Bachna's data, but we know that there's this less tangible thing called buy-in. And when stakeholders are involved in goal writing and they believe in them and their voice is heard, we know that the results can be that much greater. So I'm going to present an example of what we'd like to do based on this data metrics, but please know it's just an example. What we want to do is collaborate with teachers and principals and staff in the buildings. And we're going to look at our core values and core purpose, our district goals, and we're going to look at the site's continuous improvement plans and work in the SMART goals that are going to support and enhance all of that work being done. It all needs to tie together under an umbrella in a really strategic way. So that's what we're going to do. So again, this is one example. I'd like to come back to you with some specific examples that we create in collaboration based on this really great data that Dr. Bachna's presented. So this is an example of a SMART goal that we might write for 6th grade students in Scottsdale. So you're going to notice that it's specific, it's timely, it's measurable. All these pieces are going to be put in place. So as evidenced by 2020 AZM2 student scale score data, 6th grade students in Scottsdale Unified will demonstrate measurable growth in mathematics by increasing scaled scored results by an average of 30 points each, resulting in students moving forward in proficiency category. We find scale score data to be super helpful because we can show growth and we can look at growth over time. So it's not just, are they highly proficient, are they partially proficient, but we're looking at how that student moves forward. So for example, our 2019 data, we had some pretty healthy overall average growth, 19 points in 6th grade. If we really want to move the needle and we want students to move categories and really have that achievable growth, we could look at 30 points growth. And that would be a SMART goal that we could write. Again, this would be done with stakeholders. So I'm going to ask Dr. Bachna to come back up to show you that we have some pieces in place with School City that teachers can dive down and really see what they're looking at. And then we're going to give you some student examples based on this 6th grade example.
Thank you. So as you know, we have in our school district what is called School City. It's an online assessment platform. Into this platform, we load our state assessment data, and it allows teachers to log in and principals to log in and see their students in real time, how they did over time. The example you're seeing on the screen right now, like I said, a teacher could do this with her own class, his or her own class. On the left-hand side is this 2018 AZ Merit Spring scores in math, and then along the top are the AZ Merit 19 scores. And what this chart is showing is the numbers in green indicate the kids that went up a proficiency level from one year to the next, or one or more. The numbers in yellow are the kids that stayed at the same proficiency level. So where you see my blue arrow, it's pointing at 115. Those are the 115 students that stayed minimally proficient from 2018 to 2019. The numbers in red are students that went back a proficiency level on the test from one year to the next. When you click these numbers, so a teacher could come in here and click on the 115, they wouldn't have that many, this is the whole district, but they could click on these numbers and they could see on the next page who the students are, what their proficiency level was the previous year, and what their proficiency level is the current year. They get a list of every kid in their class. So in this first example, I'm showing you these two students, John and Jane, went from partially proficient in spring of 2018 to proficient in spring of 2019. So they went from not passing to passing. That's great. The other thing I'm showing you here on the very far right is the SS difference or scale score difference. You can see that the student, John, the first one, he went up 46 points in scale score. The second student, Jane, went up 84 points in scale score from one year to the next. So in this case, this is a student that went from not passing to passing. Good information. The second example, though, is also good information. What you see here, John and Jane, same names again. You see that in spring 2018, they were both minimally proficient, and then in spring 19, they still were minimally proficient. However, they were demonstrating some growth. If you look at their scale score differences, they are showing growth towards proficiency eventually. They are going up. So while they might not have hit that proficiency mark yet, they are making progress towards that goal.
So moving forward, we know that there is some fantastic work being done in the building level. In educational services, we want to be very strategic and targeted in partnering with schools to move forward based on SMART goals that we write together. So we will plan to review data metrics with stakeholders to target the areas of focus. We'll create SMART goals based on these targeted areas. And then key is the collaboration between teaching and learning, assessment, administrators, teachers, cabinet members, and we need to make sure there's alignment between continuous improvement plans, professional learning community goals, making sure that teachers know and understand how to dive deep and really look at individual student progress. And also provide that absolutely critical professional development for our instructors to achieve the SMART goals. We also know we need to analyze progress using the assessment data on a frequent timeline. So are there any questions?
Any questions from board members? Board Member Kravitz.
I have a question, I'm not quite sure how to phrase it, so bear with me. So I'm looking at line numbers 14, 15, and 16, high school math. And we've got passing rates between 56% for one, 46, 53. And then I'm looking back, I think this is from last year, and at third, fourth, and fifth, and we have passing rates, if I'm reading this correctly, of 73%, 68%, and 70%.
In
So-
ELA or math, I'm sorry.
Excuse me?
Was it ELA or math? I misunderstood.
Math.
Oh, thank you,
Math.
okay.
So I'm comparing math
Yeah.
to math, but I'm looking at kids in third, fourth, and fifth grade. And then by the time we get to high school, the passing rates are not as high. Is there a way of looking, or we can see how the students that are in high school now, how they did, I know it was a different test, but making more, how they did in third, fourth, and fifth grade?
Looking at the cohorts
Is
over
this
time.
similar pass rates or different? Is there a way of identifying students who maybe weren't doing well in elementary school or middle, and identifying them so that they get the remediation that they need? Because I've told in the past that, well, we have students moving forward without getting the basics that they need in order to help them when they move up to this higher level math. So is there some way that we can use this information to capture those students who maybe have fallen through the cracks or missing
Right.
basic skills, so that they can, do better on these tests? And I'm not a test person, be all and end all, but it is indicative of something. These
Right.
tests are indicative of something.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had my druthers, I'd have some other different way of assessing these students.
Right.
But we don't. Unfortunately, we're stuck with this. So those were my questions.
We can look at cohort over time and see from the inception of the test in 2015, I'm not sure what grade those students would be in today, 5 years later, but we can see where those levels have done. And we've done some of that work internally a little bit, but we haven't presented it to you.
There's also much of that work that happens in the continuous improvement plan and in the professional learning communities by teachers. So we might be able to bring an example of a team that looked at data, noticed something, put an intervention in place, and made progress. Because there's those success stories that we know we don't celebrate enough. There really is magic happening. So we want to make sure that we not only target where the needs are, but we also celebrate what's working. Yeah.
So what you saw when they clicked on the different students who had gone back, we've talked in here quite a bit about data walls. What you see here is an electronic data wall. So we don't have to devote a room and have sticky notes as people did when they were inventing data walls themselves, but they can actually bring their laptop into a classroom, sit down, talk to kids, click on certain kid to see how that kid did over time. And we have how many years?
5 years.
They have 5 years of students' data, and it's all electronic and at a fingertip and not in a room someplace anymore. I mean, it's a huge, when they showed me this as they were putting this together, I said that's something that I thought you would be interested in, because we've talked about data walls, and this is a data wall that principals or district office people, math coaches, so forth, can carry with them.
And I just wanted to add that I've had the opportunity to go to each site, and I still have a few that I'm visiting. And part of our conversation is kid-by-kid data, and so to your point of how do we make sure that they are not falling through the cracks, principals are very aware of which students are minimally proficient and partially proficient, and they have systems in place or working on those systems so that we don't lose our kids. We don't want casualties. We want to make sure that we're creating the interventions and the support that we need, and we're also making sure that we're keeping an eye on the students that are highly proficient and proficient so that they're not losing ground. And so those are conversations that we continue to have often. I appreciate that you brought the electronic data wall because our principals are very, very much working with those walls with their teachers and bringing meaning to the data and bringing other types of assessments to complement what it is that we're doing so that we know at all times how we can support our students.
Thank you.
Further questions? Board Member Beckham.
So I have a couple general questions. On the PowerPoint, you had two areas. You had highlight and you had focus. You didn't, who came up with those answers?
We work together, and Dr. Guerin's next presentation will probably talk more about the curriculum part of it.
Oh, okay.
But the important part is that we will mine the data metrics with stakeholders. Those were just some highlights for the presentation. So there is so much out there that we could focus on.
Okay. Yeah, should I ask my next question? So I think parents are going to be very interested in their child's growth instead of just some number that they get year to year. So how do the parents get, we see how the teachers in the district get it. How do parents get their children's growth? And then do the teachers talk to the parents about their growth?
Do you want to talk about what we
Go
give
ahead.
with? Okay. So the more we empower the teachers to be comfortable with this data and share, the more we're going to see it shared with parents as well as we're writing these SMART goals and sharing it. Certainly when we're looking at reading progress and math scores and benchmark data, we already know that those are happening in parent conferences. So for example, there's ELA and math assessments that all students take in certain grade levels, and that is data that's easily explainable to the parents that they can share in parent conferences. So there's more than just the report card data. We're working, in my next presentation, I'm going to talk about grading practices, so I may answer some of those questions. But as we develop SMART goals based on this, we certainly want to have transparency with our community, telling them what our areas of focus on and how we're trying to move the needle and be accountable for that. So that will be phased in as part of this work.
And the SMART goal is, you know, we've been hearing that term for about 2 or 3 years, but is this the first implementation of it, or has it been implemented the past 2.5 years?
Well, I'm sure that there are SMART goals in the continuous improvement
But I
plans
meant
and
the way
happening.
that you're using them with
but-
data. I'm sorry, I should have been more specific.
Well, I'm new to the rodeo, so it's my first time using it with the data metrics.
Yes. Okay. But as a district, have we been using this?
Our
Yeah,
our
okay,
veteran.
yes. So, okay, yes. So I'm going to come back to that, but my next question after the one about the parents was, I was wondering what the conversation is and what, and it kind of goes to your question, Board Member Kravitz. Those students who have dropped down, where we saw in red, do we have conversations with the students if they're in high school and with the parents if they're less? And what do those look like and when do those take place?
Well, typically in parent-teacher conferences. But we also have added progress reports, and there's multiple measures that we share, and I don't know if Dr. Hagia or Dr. Sakos want to jump in.
Yeah, depending on the school and their systematic approach, what we've been doing across the district is having those midterm reports so that we're able to catch students right before the quarter is over so that we can have time to remediate. And so there are, that's the formal process, but there are schools that are sending Friday folders to make sure that parents know where their student is. They have Fontes and Pinnell as one of the assessments that they look at, and so they continue to communicate the teachers with the parents so that they are aware of what is going on. What we're hoping to be able to do is be even more systematic with an electronic process, and we have a task force that's working on that, but we have continuous communication so that parents know. And again, with the parent-teacher conferences, that's another formality. But overall, many of our schools are communicating really well with their parents on bigger assessments as well as how the progress is for their student.
So are we actually then asking, sometimes at the parent conference, from what I've just, it's voluntary. So are we asking those parents whose students are not passing or have fallen down to come into a conference so that we can have that talk with them?
Yes, they schedule conference, especially both semesters, especially with those students that are needing support. It becomes more optional for the parents whose students are doing well, but I've always encouraged both because as a parent, I want to hear how great my student is doing.
I would just add, Board Member Beckham, that it is an expectation that students who are having chronic difficulties over a period of time, it's not just a bad semester, it's just, just not, a small hiccup, is that teams come together through the intervention planning team process. So that's called IPT. And so what the IPT team at elementary, middle, and high school consists of teacher or teachers, a counselor, a school psychologist, an administrator, anybody, all the relevant individuals that come around the team. That's the first step in looking at what is the core, what is the function of the student's difficulty, whether it's behavior or academic. And then that is the first step to identifying or ruling out if there are any disabilities. And so we do have IPT process, there's very parallel process under Section 504, and then of course under IDEA. Now you're looking at looking at more of a learning disability of some sort, but those teams do come together on the campuses.
So I think where I would, and this may not be able to be answered because I know how complex it is, because this is, when we look at Arizona merits, it's just one test at one time, and sure, there's going to be a small percentage that it just was a bad day.
Or
But
they don't take it seriously.
Or don't, maybe not take it serious, but typically, students do. I mean, you have to believe that they're going to try their best in that moment, hopefully. I mean, there will be some that don't, but majority will. And so when we're looking at some of these numbers, and if you take the opposite effect, which unfortunately puts it into more of a negative light, and you've got over 50% of the kids that are not passing Arizona merits, and this is maybe what you're going to do, what are we going to do, and is it possible, I believe it's possible, to move that number up? Because when I look at it over time, they stay about the same. So what are we going to be doing differently than what we've been doing the last 4 years?
Well,
to
and I hope in my
really,
next presentation, I'll capture
master-
some of that.
Get those kids. Right, that's what I was wondering. So
But
I'm
really-
glad you're going to, because that's what I think our parents really,
That
want
is
to know.
the heart of what we're doing as educators, moving the needle. And that's why we're using scaled scores in the example, because we want to see student growth over time. So absolutely.
Board Member Perleberg?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I think to your point, Board Member Beckham, that one theme that I've heard over the years is, one, overcoming the fear of this data and having productive, meaningful conversations around it by our educators. I think we're finally getting over that hurdle to a degree. I've always been told that the next step is taking this data, taking what we know the student knows, what we know the student doesn't know, how we get them there, taking it across grade levels. So that fourth grade teacher can somehow have a dialogue with the first or second grade teacher and say, the kid's coming to me, here's the gaps, here's the holes. The fourth grade teacher gets a talk with the seventh grade or eighth grade teacher, and up and up. And that's just always been a theme of discussions. By the time they hit high school, we're looking at all this data and we're almost too late. And it's like, oh, well, gee, they had this gap in third grade that never, and so I guess my question is, as we move forward with these conversations and you're taking a hard look, how do we get, kind of from where we are now, we're looking at this, every teacher's looking at it for each student, that's great. I don't think that was the norm throughout our whole district not too long ago. But now, yes, how can we have real meaningful conversations that go from, high school down to middle school down to elementary?
Well, the short answer is that we have multiple measures of assessment, and we are working with teachers to get them very comfortable in that whole cycle of teaching and learning and assessing and moving forward. And that is the heart of the professional learning community work, that we don't just use AZ Merit and look at this data once a year, that we're teaching, we're assessing, and moving forward. And when we see something working with a group, like Dr. Bachna mentioned the science at, was it Ingleside or Tavon? Tonalea, yeah. That what is going on in that building, what are we seeing, what's making the difference? But teachers need to have those specific, robust conversations in their teams to move the needle on instruction. And that also needs to be followed up with professional development so instruction grows in intervention. So I will get a little bit more into that in my next presentation, but I could talk to you about that for 2 hours if you wanted.
But there's also in the last 2 years, we've had a renewed effort in vertical articulation, so within the learning community, so that there is those discussions from school to school at the 3 levels going on a regular basis.
Maybe I'm missing something, but you can explain it hopefully. It seems to me there's a little bit of a disconnect, and I hope I'm missing something. 73% of our high school students are taking rigorous courses. And we have IB, dual enrollment, et cetera, but yet only on average, like 50% of our students are passing, are proficient or highly proficient. Can you explain that to me a little bit? So why would students, 73% of them, be taking these types of classes if only 50% of them are passing, are proficient or highly proficient in math?
It's a statewide problem of high school kids not taking it seriously. When they took away the scholarship, there's no relevance, there's no reason for them to, they're concerned about their grade point average, their college entrance. 93% graduating from high school is a huge number, and what we don't have yet, but we get later, the number, or do we have the number of students who go on to college, and that's a growing number.
Right.
So that's their concentration. We've talked ad nauseum with the high school principals about what can we do to have the kids take these more seriously. At the state level, they changed, so this year it's going to be different than it was the last couple of years. It's not end of course. It's going to be all sophomores taking it. I've lived through 4 or 5 iterations of the high school tests, and the only time that the state tests were taken seriously by students was when a scholarship was tied to their being what is now considered highly proficient, but exceeding on the test. That went away because it was so popular that the universities found that they were losing too much money, and they petitioned or lobbied the legislature to change that. Take away the incentive for high school kids, and they focus on what's important to them.
I wanted to also thank you for mentioning Tonalia. I think there's some great things going on there. I toured a ELL classroom, and they are doing some wonderful things, and knowing that they have Algebra 1 now, I'm excited to see what they're going to do going forward. So, bringing it. Board Member Beckham?
Since you brought this, I'm going to bring this up, if I have my numbers correct. So percentage of students enrolled in college in their first year was 76%.
Yes.
And then unfortunately, when I Xeroxed this off, it cut off. But under high school metrics, was it the national benchmark, the ACT?
Yes.
I want to be able to say to the students out there that this is a very important number, especially if 73% of you are going on to college, and that those ACT numbers, I would not say that those are real positive.
Well, you have to keep it,
numbers.
yes.
Is it 30, I know that it's a percentage, so is it 39% of, I guess I should ask what before I make a conclusion there, but if 73% of our students are going on to college, they should know that testing is important, and that whether it's Arizona Merits or ACT. So I'd just like them to maybe think about that a little bit harder and what it can mean for their future. Realizing it's just a test, but.
And the thing with our ACT scores is it used to be a self-select test, only the students that chose to take it, but we've gone to the district-wide testing the last 2 years, so we actually are seeing everybody's taking it. Now, again, it's a question of, are they taking it seriously? Are they really diving into it when they take it?
And the national norm is based on, there's only a handful of states where everybody takes it. So it's self-selected in most of the country.
Right.
So it's the higher end kids that are taking it, and we're giving it to everybody.
Right, which is absolutely wonderful.
Right.
And
Right.
a
That's
gift
so
to our students.
So our 100% of the students are being matched with the top 20-25% across the country. And that's why we have 26% or 35% for science.
Okay.
And those benchmarks are indicating, trying to be predictive of future success in college courses. So that first one, number 22, is talking about math courses in your first year of college. 23 is talking about English courses. And so you can see in our data, our English scores are the strongest.
Right. Which also reflects in our Arizona Merits, correct?
I think so, yes. I think our English were a little bit higher, but I'd have to look at that.
Any further questions?
If you want. Andy?
Do
Ask.
we need a recess? I'm all good?
I took one.
Okay. Okay. Do you want us to move on or wait? You can. We're going to move on to our next discussion item, 4E. Dr. Picard.
Thank you, President Beckman, members of the board. Tonight is Dr. Guerin's night. We thought it was, I thought it was important that you hear there's so much going on in the Educational Services Department. I thought it was good to bring you up to date as information items on some of the things that that department is doing to let you know that we are proactive and moving forward. So, Dr. Guerin.
I promise my last presentation of the evening. So I want to take a moment, and I'm going to ask the teaching and learning team to stand and remain standing. I know they're not going to like it. Come on. This team is incredibly dedicated to serving teachers, to support instruction, to help that magic happen in the classroom every single day, tirelessly. And I have been truly impressed with them. So I just wanted them to stand and be recognized because we are very lucky to have them. So thank you. So, believe me, I'm not, but I could spend hours on their work, so these are just a few highlights. So first of all, as Dr. Krieghardt said, in educational services, we're taking a comprehensive approach in supporting teaching and learning and instruction. So under his leadership, we're reestablishing robust committee work involving stakeholders groups. We believe the voices of the staff, the principals, the leaders, the teachers are so very important in regards to making decisions and moving forward. So you will start to see some of this robust committee work come before you. One of the first ones we're starting on right now is professional development. We are getting a ton of volunteers, of people that want to serve on our professional development committee, which will help make decisions moving forward on what's important that we provide and making sure it's relevant and needed and timely. We're collaborating with multiple departments to create synergy across all areas. Some examples of this are special education teachers receiving all the math materials, attending math training alongside regular education staff, but also receiving training individualized to their students' special needs. So we need to make sure that special education students are exposed to grade level content and rigor, and we're supporting that. So that's that synergy with teaching and learning and special education. And assessment is clearly a partner in the work we're doing because Dr. Bachna and her small but mighty team are providing us the data that we need to move forward and making sure we're making the right decisions. Something that came up through principals and coaches that once you heard it, you went, of course this makes sense. Cognitive coaching. Just because you are a leader or a content specialist doesn't necessarily mean you can't improve your skills related to coaching other adults to improve. That in itself is a soft skill. So we are working on providing our teacher instructional leaders, our TILs, our coaches and administrators cognitive coaching training to help empower them to ensure that others are moving their practice forward, because you need both the content expertise and the way to teach and get that across to an adult, which is a different skill. We also have put together an educational services newsletter to streamline communication. So teachers and administrators know who to go to and who's out there to support them. So they're hearing from us specifically. So these are just a few highlights. First, I want to present to you our rigor and relevance framework that you've seen before. This is a district-wide initiative that teaching and learning is supported. So this is the work of Dr. Daggett, and how we are supporting our rigor, relevance, and relationships is collaborative work with leaders centered around supporting that continuous improvement plan. We asked principals, we want to support your work with the TILs. So what training can we provide TILs in regards to rigor, relevance, and relationships so they can move your work forward? So we're partnering with building leaders on that. Professional development for administrators during all administrator meetings. This Thursday, we have a whole section planned on rigor. So this, we know professional development, it needs to be a continuous message and it needs to be ongoing. And then, of course, we're providing that content-specific support. We're making science come to life with science every day, and that is certainly moving the needle on rigor and relevance for students, because it's relevant because they're trying to solve real-world problems, and certainly that whole scientific discovery process brings rigor into the equation. So those are some of the ways teaching and learning is supporting that. Secondly, a few board members brought up, what do we do when it's not working? So this is a little bit of a busy graphic, but it shows our leadership is working very hard on what to do when it's working and we need to provide more, and what to do when it's not working and we need to intervene. So the blue box is our Tier 1 district curriculum. It's our core grade level content that all students need to experience with differentiation, and this should meet the needs of 80% of all of our students. If students need extra challenge, we're working hand in hand with our new Director of Gifted to talk about progress monitoring and targeted enrichment. Do we need to just add enrichment to what they're already being provided, or do they need specialized and different content? So we're working on making sure we meet the needs of those students as well. We have students that are struggling, and we use something called a universal screener, where we look to see, we talked about students falling through the cracks or not realizing till high school. So these benchmarks, the screeners, all these different little assessment tools, separate from our yearly annual standardized assessment, are going to help kids bubble up so we know specifically where they're struggling and how we can help. And we will have targeted interventions based on that. And if a student is still struggling, it will be intense interventions. So we know so much of this work is going on in the building, and we want to honor that. We want to enhance it and support it and make it uniform across our unified district. So if it's working in one building and it's in need of another, we're going to make that happen. So this is an area of growth for us. There's so much going on that's great, but we always can take it to the next level, both in enhancement and in remediation. I know you've heard a lot about science every day. We are very excited that we have schools involved. The initial training already took place for high school, middle school, and elementary teachers, and we are early adopters in the new science standard. So we are jumping in with both feet, and we absolutely believe we can move the needle on this in regards to our student achievement. We also know, I am a mom of a teenager, that when we make it relevant, our youth today care about our real world problems, and when you center learning around solving some of those problems in a project-based learning environment, they become very excited and become visionaries and don't really have that, oh, we can't do that attitude. Teachers have to scale them back and say, you know what, you might not solve global warming in one semester, but we can help you work in our community on A, B, and C. So there's a lot of magic that happens there. Each teacher will receive 4 sessions of in-class coaching. This is not just sit and get professional development. It's in the classroom coaching during science teaching. Administrators will also be receiving mini coaching sessions, so when they walk through their classrooms, whether it's formal or informal, that they're going to know what to look for in regards to this the new science standards. Quickly, have you heard we had a math adoption last year? I know that you're aware of it. So new materials are in place in all campuses. There's online access, K-12, and there's trainings, and more trainings. We got the materials in most teachers' hands in May, kicked off our training in May, followed it by summer support, and we have several of our half-day trainings, very specific, where everyone is working on math throughout the district. In addition, we have math coaching going on because we know effective professional development goes hand in hand with not only trainings, but coaching in between the trainings. We have model lessons, special education trainings, developing mathematical thinkers, and iReady training. So there is so much magic going on. And you know, it was quite a journey to select all this curriculum, but frankly, the hard work begins now because we need to implement it with fidelity and really move the needle on our math instruction. I've talked ad nauseum about professional development. It is so important. We are asking our principals to lead professional development to other administrators. We think it's so important that that collaboration happens specifically with our learning communities, and it's focused on rigor, relevance, and relationships. We have our new teacher orientation, the STARS program that meets regularly. We have curriculum teams and curriculum maps that are led by the coaches. Instructional coaches, if you walk through the building, you're not going to see them very often because they are on campuses and in classrooms, and that is really a point of pride in our classroom. We have the TIL training that I mentioned, where we asked principals for direction so we could focus our training. Advanced Ed is switching over to Cognia, that's their new name, and we are looking at doing some advanced work before we have our accreditation visits next year. So that is something we're getting in front of in teaching and learning to provide support with Dr. Sakos and the secondary administrators. Fine arts, there's something kids can earn called a fine arts seal that will go on their diploma. Gifted training is robust and ongoing, and we're also including parents in gifted training. And special education training is tailored to provide specialized needs and also content, grade level content for those teachers. The adoption we're working on now is a world language adoption. I'm not going to go through the whole slide, but we have 30 committee members. All learning communities are represented and all languages taught are represented. This is a passionate group that are working very hard on rubrics to narrow down the selection of vendors. It's important to note we have parent representatives on this committee and special education representatives. You're going to notice all our stakeholder groups are going to be more robust and inclusive based on Dr. Creekart's leadership. Once we get down to our final recommendation, we'll be bringing materials to you to look at in February and kick off the adoption next year. I did mention that we are working on grading practices. This is really putting all the pieces together. We have grading practices work that's been going on through since 2017. We have our Synergy gradebook work, and we have report card work. So we are bringing all this work together under one umbrella to move grading practices forward with a specific target at the elementary level. And our end goal is to have grading practices that reflect student learning, that is fair and equitable, that parents can electronically view at the K-5 level through Synergy, and consistent use of the standards grading practices. So Dr. Hagegot and teaching and learning and principals we're starting with elementary and bringing it all together under one umbrella. So you will be hearing more about this in the future. My last slide is just a snapshot of our new newsletter. Because we're out and about so much and we're in the buildings, you might see a name through the email but not put the face to the name. Or who's in charge of that? I can't remember. So everyone in teaching and learning has their own individual newsletter page with a photo, contact information, and updates. This comes out every other week. So teachers receive it, administrators receive it, and they know where to go to when they need help, and they know the latest and greatest information in a timely fashion. I want to wrap up by really expressing my gratitude to all the dedicated individuals in educational services that work so hard every day to make the magic happen in the classroom. Any questions?
Board Member Kravitz.
Well, I have two. And so, on the math adoption slide, you mentioned in the spring you provided teachers with materials prior to summer. Was there training that went with it, or it's just here's your book and look through it, and then I'll bundle my question. So
thank you for sending me that question. So I reached out, and Cheryl Redner shared that 449 teachers were trained in May before they left on those contract days.
Oh, okay.
And then 65 teachers came in on their own in the summer if they were at a different training or missed that. So the summer trainings were a repeat of what happened in May, and then in August we kicked off level 2 or phase 2.
Oh, okay. So the 449 teachers in the spring were current teachers. So then I wouldn't expect them to show up again.
Exactly,
in the summer. Okay, that
exactly.
was
But
my
we,
second.
what I loved is they offered multiple offerings, and even when they were offering it to the new teachers, they opened up, if you missed it, if you want to hear it again, it is a repeat. So there's multiple opportunities to receive the information, and then there's coaching as well at the building.
Okay.
We are also designating a till to really focus on the math work at the buildings.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any further questions? Board Member Beckham.
I think Sandra sent us the link, or we somehow got the newsletter, and I just wanted to say I was very impressed with it. Thought it was very professional. I thought it was very informative. I thought it was one of the really encouraging that some of the internal communications. Things like this can really shift internal communication. So I want to thank you for bringing that to the district.
I really appreciate, we had to go around with a camera because not everyone likes their photo taken and published, but they were really good sports about it.
Okay, any further questions for Dr. Guerin? No? Thank you so much. We move to our final discussion item, F, Dr. Ricard, the calendar.
Dr. Gadd has the beginning of this year's calendar, this budget process by showing you the preparation calendar.
Thank you,
Mr. Gadd.
Gadd. Madam President, members of the board, you have contained in your packet and up on the screen is the proposed budget preparation calendar for this upcoming year. It has some similarities to the one that we used last year in which to prepare this year's budget. The first slide indicates that we will bring to you an early projection of next year's M&O budget on November 19th. That will include an estimate of average daily membership for next year based upon the 40th day ADM count from this year. We appear to be 100 to 125 short of last year's ADM, which is a decided improvement over our 600 students from last year. So things are getting better, but there's hills and valleys throughout if you look at the history. We will have 3 reviews of the M&O budget before we ask you to give some tentative approval on March the 3rd. That date is key as it was this year to issuing contracts, and that's when we will ask you to also approve salary schedules and supplemental pay for the M&O budget. The inflation factor will be included. We're estimating about 2%. That is typical of what the state's been doing recently. And it's important to note, because it's going to drive much of that budget, is this is the last year of the 2020 plan from the governor. So this remaining and last 5%, which will take place next year, will be the last effort that at least is announced on his part to improve teacher salaries. From there, it will be up to whatever process takes its place, if there is one. The next slide indicates that we will ask you for tentative approval on April 7th for capital. That allows us to get started early on capital procurement, both capital projects, furniture and equipment, textbooks, lots of different subjects, as you know. Us starting early before summer helps us get things in place before school restarts. And then the standard approval of the advertisement for the proposed budget and the adoption of the budget on June 23rd. What is different this coming year will be our inclusion of some public meetings. We have a January 30th and a February 27th public meeting calendared in this room to advertise to the public, parents, etc., just as we've been doing with the upcoming override election, providing information. And both of these meetings are timed before the board is being asked to give tentative approval to either the M&O or the capital budget. So you'll have the benefit of that input. And then staff meetings. We've got a couple. The district administration meeting, which is basically all administrators on February 6th, and then the executive leadership on February 11th. So both, again, are prior to us asking you for tentative approval of either the M&O or the capital outlay budget. And with that, any questions the board might have, I'll be happy to try to answer those for you.
Any questions? No? Board Member Beckham.
First of all, I want to thank you for bringing forward the calendar and including the public and the administration and staff. I want to reiterate that the vision, if I want to see if this is correct or accurate, is that this is not a time to go back and forth regarding what the budget is, but to be able to provide a voice, that you have input into it, and then it would be considered. And so in light of that, I would like to also just encourage you to also include teachers in those public meetings.
Okay. Thank you for that suggestion, and thank you for the compliment.
Any
And
other
I will be
comments?
having meetings through superintendent's liaison, as well as informal meetings with teachers and with administrators, where I will be receiving input too on things and highlight those things that directly affect them. So we'll be gathering input through the course of the year through those meetings that we've established as well.
Any further comments or questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Gadd. We move now to our consent agenda, and I also move to approve the consent agenda without item 5D, the approval of the award of request for proposal number 20003, disposable food packaging. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Greenberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Moving on now, Board Member Beckham had asked that consent agenda item 5D be pulled. The award of request for proposal number 20003, disposable food packaging. Board Member Beckham.
The reason I pulled it is I didn't get an answer to my question on what the dollar amount of funds being requested is. I didn't know if there was a history of this expenditure. And then what is the terms of the contracts?
Ms. Spielberg, could you help us with the answer?
I will. Thank you, Board Member Beckham, for those questions. Sorry we didn't get back to you. I just heard probably about half an hour before the board meeting, there was even a question about it. So the annual spend on disposable food packaging on this particular contract runs at about $20,000 a year. It is not significant. Most of our spend is going to be coming through our Aspen Mojave contract, and Shamrock Foods is our vendor through there. That's why they had a no bid response in this, is we do purchase through our Aspen Mojave contract. All of this is outside of M&O. It's through our 510 food service funds.
Okay, so you're just asking for approximately $20,000. That's all it is per year? Okay.
It's not much. It really is not. And in the courts, we just wanted to make sure that in the course of the 5 years, we didn't exceed that $100,000 limit. That's why we went out for a formal award for that.
Oh.
Any other questions? Be happy to answer them. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, do I have a motion to approve the award of request for proposal number 20003, disposable food packaging?
So moved.
Board Member Kravitz moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Perleberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Moving on now to our action items. 6A, the first of which is bond planning projects, Kiva Elementary School. Dr. Precard.
Thank you, President Beckham, members of the board. Tonight, I am very happy to present this action item to you to name Kiva Elementary School as the next school to be rebuilt or remodeled under the 2016 bond. It's a misprint on the agenda that said 18. I would like to make sure that we all understand that this is an important next step. This would be the 5th school to be rebuilt or renovated, not including Navajo, but out of the bond issue. It's next on the matrix that we used a year ago. It's next in line, but it is not the end of the discussions for the Saguaro complex. This is a piece of the pie. We'll be coming back in November and December and talking about the Saguaro Complex, as well as the other learning communities as well. We look at it, but we are looking at this as an important start, and then we have more work to do. Mr. Rayler is here still. Yes, Mr. Rayler is still here. We talked again today. The question was asked about the timing of this. So by coming to you now gives us the opportunity, as Mr. Rayler and his staff look at where they are with the projects ongoing, Cherokee, Hohokam, Navajo, and make a determination as to when we can start Kiva. We expect that it will probably be sometime this spring that we begin that process of finding an architect and begin the community meetings with the feasibility study. And Mr. Rayler can talk about the budget and how this has an impact on the bond budget as well. So.
Mr. Rayler?
Good evening. I put together a real thorough presentation for you on this one. Sorry, it was last minute.
You put that on the screen?
So I guess let's talk about timeline first. As soon as Navajo's off my plate, with the support from our intern, Dan Collinsworth, who has just been fantastic, I think that we could probably start that visioning committee conversation in the early spring, February, March, probably not much later than March, so that we can get that conversation going. As you know, with Cherokee, that was almost a year-long conversation. I'd prefer that we not have a year-long conversation, but we could definitely get it going quickly and get that moving along. I think the market is going to continue to get more and more expensive. So we need to be aware of that and not delay too many more projects for too long, because it's just going to cost us money. From the perspective of budget, let me just give you a quick rundown. And you don't have to write this down or do the math, I've done it for you. Hopi, 19.299 million. Pima, 18.440 million. We have currently Cherokee budgeted at 22,680 in the millions. 21,520 for Hohokam. And that's where I stopped making adjustments because I didn't have any further direction. So Kiva, Pueblo, 68th Street are still the campuses that have not been formally approved, and therefore budgets have not been jostled about to try and get to the point we need them to be. Kiva originally was at 16.275. We've done a little bit of work over there to try and keep them in a good place. Pueblo, again, 16.275. We've done a little bit of work over there to try and keep them in a good place. And then 68th Street was originally $10 million, and with the demolition of the site, that's down to about 9.4. So all total of the schools that have not been put under contract, we're at $85,227,000. For the two schools that have been completed, Hopi and Pima, we're at $37,739,000. So way back when, in 2015-16, November 16, actually when the bond was passed, the original ask was about $129 million for rebuilds. Now, there wasn't a specific line that said school rebuild. The line on the pamphlet was actually for $219 million, but that was for renovations, athletics, school environment, all of those things combined. So if, for whatever reason, we needed to spend more money on one thing or the other, it would just simply be making decisions about what goes or doesn't go. But our limit is $219 million for renovations, rebuilds, and all of the things that we're doing. The other $10 million is essentially tied up in transportation and safety and security. So I think Shannon's going to be coming back to you next board meeting with kind of that update, showing you where the spend has been. So
originally, if I can interrupt, so originally there were 8 campuses that were mentioned.
Correct.
We've finished 2. We have 2 more under construction. So Kiva would be the 5th.
correct.
And then
Pueblo,
and then that would be the next one in
Navajo,
line,
which is
you think,
now-
and finishing Navajo.
Yep.
So my question is, from 8 to 6 plus Navajo, can you guarantee that we have capacity in this bond to do those remaining schools?
absolutely. Without a doubt. And just as a side note, of the 249 line items, which essentially make up projects that we've completed thus far in the bond, the original budgets for those projects were $82,393,000, and currently under contract, we're at 71 million, and paid to date, we're at 69 million. So even what we had budgeted versus what we've actually got under contract, we're in really good shape if we need to move money out of those projects.
Questions for Dennis? Board Member Becker.
I just want to say thank you for bringing those numbers forward and for your timelines so that our communities know what that next step would be.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Question for Dennis?
Well, it's a question for Dennis or Dr. Creekard, because, let's see, in your email to us, is not said funds on the existing projects, let's see, that date, sorry. You had mentioned that we also have some smaller projects that need to be done. So how will those fit in? I know to the timeline that you're discussing, when we were building Pima and Hopi, we had a small project in Cheyenne. So, I mean, we have the Oak Street, I always get our campuses, the Old Tonalea, but there's a building there and the community can't use it. So, I know we're talking about Kiva, but this is we're talking about the whole timeline. I know we have another high school that has a problem with one of its buildings that wasn't, I don't think, being considered as part of the bond, but may have to be, I don't know. And maybe that's another small project.
Which high school, which building?
J600 at Chaparral has some issues.
Yeah. We have a lot of buildings with a lot of issues. That's why we have the bond. And we are pushing through, I'd say easily $10 million just in capital repairs, air conditioning repairs, roofing repairs. We just wrapped up the Coronado project that, for all intents and purposes, was a $3 million job that we got for $1.2 million. So we're constantly, the construction projects are really what takes up the majority of my time. But having Dan on board, having Alice, my new admin assistant, on board, they're helping to relieve a lot. And we'll keep going. We'll keep pushing the projects. And if at some point I just can't do it all, I'll come back to Dr. Creekard and Jeff Gadd and say we need to get a project management firm on board. But with the monies that we've already lost with inflation, I prefer not to do that. I'd prefer to keep pushing hard and get it all done. So.
Board Member Furtherburg?
Okay, I'm gonna take a deep breath.
Oh, I thought this was for Dennis, or?
It goes to, and it's not a question for you. Thank you for all your hard work. I know the AG does love you, but I'm glad Michelle Marshall pointed that out to us. But all your hard work and your teams, just done a phenomenal job. I appreciate you bringing up that, I mean, back when we went to our community for the ask of this bond, 8 schools were identified as schools that we have that if we're going to continue to use, they need rebuilt or renovated. And I want to go back to what Dr. Krikard said earlier. This vote tonight that we're at is step one in a conversation. It's long, long overdue, and I want to connect the two things so that we are honest and straightforward with our community tonight. We have an excess capacity issue in our district that we have not dealt with for a decade. We don't want our community to feel like with each approval of the next rebuild that we're ignoring that, or that our big master plan is to rebuild schools we can't fill. I don't feel that was ever promised by any past board or this board or anything. I just want to be straightforward tonight as we take this next step, that these conversations have to happen, and any thought of there's steps all laid out exactly and we know what they are, that's just not being honest if we try and portray that tonight. So just gotta say it, and appreciate it. Appreciate the conversations ahead of us and all the hard work going on in our district. So thank you.
I do as well. And since there is no time set aside for public comment tonight, we do have some members of the Kiva community. I wanted to make a few comments myself. Every day, 578 students get up and go to school at Kiva. They learn in a building that was built in 1957. Kiva has had no meaningful renovations in 62 years. I am told it has asbestos in the walls, dated bathrooms, and AC issues. In fact, I understand Kiva is the least energy efficient school in our district. Despite these challenges, 578 families choose Kiva for its strong academics, experienced and loving teachers, and its incredible community. Many from that community are here this evening. Thank you. Since my children first attended Kiva 10 years ago, SUSD has had many agonizing discussions about the future of the school, creating significant concern in the community. Kiva began as a K-8, then it was turned into a K-6. 10 years ago, the K-8 discussion came forth again, only to be dropped. Then Kiva became a K-5. Then once again, the K-8 discussion, this time around, the district did presentations in the school library discussing what it would look like. It was then dropped. Kiva was then told you must find an identity if you want to be rebuilt, which was confusing at the time because Kiva was the #1 K-5 academically in SUSD and #4 in Maricopa County, but still an identity was needed. I think the identity was clear. Dr. Birdwell then came to the Kiva library and said, Kiva, you are not closing. You are next to be rebuilt. I know this because I attended the meeting. We all know what happened after this. Kiva lost 3 principals and the entire front office staff, as well as many valuable teachers. Enter the current wonderful principal, Alice Spingola. She calmed and she united the community. Thank you, Principal Spingola. Belinda Gulick made a strong point to us from the podium this spring. She said, Kiva is my home school, and my family would have happily attended Kiva, but we were uncertain about the school given the district's hesitancy to commit to a rebuild. A year ago, you had a presentation from Applied Economics. Kiva's enrollment was at 504. They actually projected Kiva to be at 461 this year. As of August, enrollment was at 578, including 46 preschool students and 110 kindergarten students. Kiva has grown. I am voting yes to rebuilding or remodeling Kiva. These families deserve a new school. I would ask my fellow board members to do the same. We need to put our students first and to stop holding Kiva hostage based on our ever-changing school rebuild criteria. Thank you. Any other questions? Board Member Greenberg?
Thank you for setting out that timeline because I think it's very illustrative. And I entirely support what you say. I think it's very odd to hear these statements about these discussions that have had to occur at some point when, you know, I'm relatively new to the board, as is the board president, but, you know, we've had the majority of the board has been on the board for 2.5+ years. and how it's possible that those discussions did not occur when you went out for the bond and are now holding schools hostage
Excuse me?
to this. No, what I'm saying is that you're saying that what you're specifically alleging is that these conversations did not occur, or if they did occur, they were dropped. But that isn't something that's in the power of the community or the families or the children who attend these schools. These are our students, just as I said earlier. We are supposed to do what is in their best interest, what is in the best interest of the district as a whole. And working in and attending school every day in a building that is that old and not fit for purpose in the modern day, that has had bad press because of the state of the buildings. And if you read through our headhunters report of community comments, every single community group, teachers, students, classified, admin, every single one of those groups in those 75 pages that were interviewed, every single one of them brought up facility issues as one of the issues that they believed faced our district. Every single one of those groups. So to say that, well, you know, we were in charge and I was board president for 2 years and, you know, we somehow were unable to schedule these discussions and actually conclude them, and then hold our community hostage by saying, you know, oh, we need to sit around and, you know, talk more about this, is wrong. Mr. Rayler is specifically saying that we have inflation issues, we have growing costs for expenses, we have extensive needs. The board president has pointed out key things that are, you know, environmental issues, poor energy efficiency, probably poor water efficiency. I mean, I'm just shocked. I mean, I really don't understand what the issue is here. This has 578 students.
Board Member Powell.
First of all, we were building other schools, and many of them, most of them, if not, I would say all of them, because we did do a matrix, were in equally bad shape. And you could make an argument for that. So nobody is saying that Kiva doesn't deserve to be rebuilt or isn't in horrible shape. I saw the tree growing through the window in the principal's office when Nick Noonan was the principal there. But you have to make decisions about
So do you want to close this school? Yes or no?
That's not what we're voting on.
Do you want to close this school? Yes or no?
I have no desire
So then
to
what?
close the
So then
school,
we should
why-
rebuild it.
That's not what we're asking about. We're voting on, are we rebuilding the school?
How long are we
We're
going to
not
talk?
voting on, are we closing the school? We're
Yeah,
voting
so
on,
if
are
you
we
don't,
rebuilding the school?
so if you don't want to rebuild it, what do
I
you
did,
want?
did I
What do you want
say,
these people?
excuse me, let me be perfectly clear, do not interrupt me. You don't like it when other people interrupt you. No one has said anything about closing Kiva.
That's incorrect. That is incorrect. At the last board meeting, that is specifically what the board.
Have we
what
voted on
Board member
closing
Perleberg
Kiva?
brought up.
No.
Excuse, am I missing
Excuse me,
something?
have I ever uttered the words that I want to
We
close
do
Kiva?
have an
Dr. Picard,
overcapacity
can you
in our
verify
district.
that,
Can
please?
you admit we have an overcapacity in our district based on what we've seen?
Do we have excess capacity in
Yes.
certain
Do we have
areas?
excess?
Yes.
Do we have excess capacity?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
So what does that have to do with Kiva, which has
I'm not-
578
I'm-
students?
Stick to the
Let's stick to the
agenda.
topic,
The
okay?
topic was Kiva. Nobody was discussing closing Kiva.
That is inaccurate according to the record at the last time we discussed this. And I have the transcript if you would like me to read it out.
Dr. Picard, have I ever spoken to you or this governing board about closing Kiva?
No, you have not.
Thank you. Thank you. I have never, ever felt Kiva should be closed as a board member. I don't even know if I'm even supposed to say something. That's a public meeting, so I guess I get to. I've had a lot of things said about what I think or what I want said that is inaccurate. Closing Kiva was never that. The reality of the Swirl complex, possibly having to see a consolidation and a change in placement of programs, is the conversation that we have had to have for a very long time. And instead, over the years, we have tried to focus with the bond on what we knew the no-brainer builds and rebuilds were. And that is all that I have ever asked for, wanted, needed. This district is needed. And I would just appreciate words not being put in my mouth.
No discussion about closing Kiva. There's been rumors out there that a former board member was interested in selling it to another entity.
Okay.
She's not on the board now.
Let's stick to the agenda. Board Member Beckham?
As far as I will stick to the agenda. It was my understanding that the ask is that we would be looking and we would be getting the information before we voted on Kiva or Pueblo or the next rebuild, that we would be looking at the Granite Reef Corridor and the Saguaro Complex, looking at capacity and enrollment. So I was expecting that conversation from our district to happen tonight, since it was put on the agenda by our district. It's not going to happen again, and I believe that is what Board Member Perlberg has been trying to have a conversation, and I respect what you are trying to say, but I think what you may not understand is that a lot of times what the board asks for, as you could say, you have been asking for an internal audit, and somehow miraculously it doesn't come up. That is the exact same situation that has been being asked, and it is not presented to us when we have asked for it to be presented. I think that that is the essence of what was asked by past boards and Barbara Perlberg.
Thank you.
Okay, well, are we ready to move on this? Are there any further discussions or questions? All right, I move to approve our next bond planning project, Kiva Elementary School. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And can I say one thing?
You can.
I am going to vote for Kiva because I support rebuilding the school. But what I don't support is that I believe that we have asked that we discuss the Saguaro Complex and the Granite Reef Complex, and it has not continually been brought up. And I was going to bring that up whether or not this other discussion was brought up. So I am very disappointed in that. I thought about abstaining, but I will say that I do believe that Kiva should be rebuilt.
Okay, so I have 5-4, correct? Motion passes 5-0. Congratulations, Kiva, you have your rebuild. Okay, we move now to our next action item. Or would you like a recess?
Keep going.
All right, get it done.
Okay. Next action item, 6B. The approval of the continuation of the contract with McPherson and Jacobson for the superintendent search. Dr. Krikar.
So we bring this item back that was tabled, and I believe each board member has had an opportunity to talk with the representative from McPherson Jacobson, and so we leave the recommendation as it is and open the discussion.
I would love to hear from the other board members. If anyone has spoken with them, get your thoughts on this. I've been back and forth. Obviously, I said I valued your opinion with this because I was not part of the process originally. So if anyone has any discussion, I would appreciate it.
You go first.
Remember back.
I had an opportunity to talk with Dr. Joel, Steve Joel, who was part of the group that did not lead the McPherson Jacobson search. We had a very candid discussion about what was heard by their group and then what was said by ours and what we thought was communicated. I did more research on what to expect from a professional search group. And I did not see much difference between different groups, so when I came down to trying to assess, do we use the same group, given that we're going to have a new individual in leadership who appeared to really listen when I was speaking and was able to communicate back what he heard. I think that they may have a better understanding of what at least I am looking for in a superintendent. So given that they have already done some of that preliminary work, I am going to be supporting going ahead and trying again to use McPherson and Jacobson. I am hopeful and optimistic that the individuals, which would be the three of us, and the individuals in McPherson and Jacobson that will, Dr. Joel, that we will really look at our past experiences. We will maybe assess some of the lessons that were learned, and we will use some of those lessons to maybe do a better job of communicating, and so that we can have an end result where we will have qualified candidates that really fit this district and what we're looking for.
Further discussion?
Michelle, I have a question for you.
Yes.
If we choose not to use McPherson and Jacobson, do we have to pay out the rest of the contract?
No.
Okay, that was one question. I also spoke with Mr. Joel. We had a very candid conversation. I believe that he has a better understanding of what it is that we're looking for and how to lead this search. This district has used several, I don't know if it's many or several, search firms. I don't know that there is much difference between the services that they provide, so it's basically you're hoping that it's a personality, a question of whether there's a personality fit. I know we've used Ray and Associates, we've used ASBA twice. I don't remember who we used for Dr. Irwin. I think it was a two.
Berenson?
Yeah, so I don't know that we will, we have a contract. I feel we've done some of the groundwork. I feel comfortable working with Dr. Joel based upon my conversation.
I would simply add, I spoke with Dr. Joel as well, and he has a realistic handle on our district, and we had a very frank, open discussion, and I feel comfortable us just continuing on with it.
Board Member Greenberg.
So with this $15,000 being the remainder of the contract, these 3 bullet points are what that amount of money would cover? Is that my understanding?
I haven't spoken with them about that directly, but Dr. Precard has, and that's his understanding.
These are the changes from the previous search. In that they believe it's an update of the community input meeting, so they hold one during the daytime and one in the evening. They would work with the board as they did in the past, but it will be either Dr. Joel or Dr. Kammersall to work, because 2/5 of the board has changes to make sure that the criteria is updated, and then they will develop a new timeline for the hiring. And then what does not say here, and maybe should be understood, but should be stated here for the record, and then follow the posting, application, review, recommendations to bring forward to you through the final selection of the superintendent.
So basically what they would have done, the remainder of the work.
Right.
And when the board last discussed the contract with them, there were additional costs on top of these that they were considering, such as having a community forum with the finalists, or some sort of, it's not included in this. It wouldn't be part of that approval, but I just wanted to see if that is
I
that.
don't think that was ever solidified last year, so we never got to that point of having that final discussion. That is something that Ms. Marshall can talk to them about.
Board Member Beckham.
Not to my memory's correct, but the existing contract we had for, and I can't remember, was it 39,000 or something? Even if we had spent all of the 39 and we didn't find somebody, or it was the wrong fit within a short period of time, for no extra charge, they would come back, and we would be able to go through that same process again. So I'm anticipating that, I don't know if that language is still in this contract or not, so we need to check that, but that really wasn't gonna be my point. My point is that even if we didn't have the 15, they would be coming back and doing the process. I do have one request. I want Dr. Steve Joel to be the lead on this and not to have another consultant. So you had mentioned another consultant, and that would not be acceptable to me. He had said he would be doing it, and so I want to make sure that that's in the contract.
He said that to me as well.
Yeah.
Can
Okay.
I clarify? You said be the lead. I know that they sometimes bring people to assist. Dr. Camerzal is in southern Arizona, so I believe. You just want to make sure that he is the lead or that he's the only consultant working on it? Or I just want to make sure I'm clear.
Well, no, the lead being the one who was here. Because the way that
Directing
you
it.
had
Okay,
said it,
got it.
I'm sure they're going to have maybe more than one consultant, maybe helping out.
And then I wanted to clarify another point. Even under the original terms, additional meetings outside of what they'd agreed to and expenses in terms of travel are in addition. So just to make sure you are clear on that.
Any further comments, questions? Board Member Greenberg?
So it's my understanding from 3 board members who worked with them in the past that all 3 of you are comfortable working with them again. Is that my understanding?
Working with
Yes, I am.
With Dr.
As long as it's
Joel?
Dr. Joel.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve action item 6B, the approval of the continuation of the contract with McPherson and Jacobson for the superintendent search?
So moved.
Board Member Kravitz makes the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Greenberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, that makes this next one very easy. We move now to action item 6C, the approval of the issuance of request for quotes for the new superintendent search firm. Is there any questions or discussion on that? No? Okay, I move to approve action item 6C, the approval of the issuance of request for quotes for the new superintendent search. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Wait,
No.
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna be
You don't
against
need
it.
an hour, you don't need an hour, because you voted for
Apologies,
McPherson Jacobson.
apologies. I thought you were asking to vote. I thought you had asked not to, sorry, apologies.
It's been a long
Apologies,
night.
apologies.
Okay, no motion.
No motion.
All right, I move to adjourn the special meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Special meeting is adjourned at 8:25 PM.